Lord Jesus Christ be with us this week. Hallelujah. Amen. Play some Adam Lower music. Okay. It says we are live. One of my best friends from high school is in the chat. Hi there, Ryan. Alright.
Hey, SB. There's a little tiny typo.
I can fix
title.
it. Oh, Paul's. I see it, Paul's.
Yeah.
There. Let's see. Did that correct it live?
I'll check.
Are we on?
Yeah, we're on.
All
Ryan
right.
Martin's here.
Ryan Martin.
Corrected.
It didn't?
No.
You refreshed it?
Oh, wait, I
Okay,
refreshed
because
it again. It's fine
usually
now.
it does.
Oh, hey, I've got the link. It says, watch live now, SB Alger. RX Only Picture Show.
We got Ryan Martin, Gypsy Hustle, Jacob Baucus,
41 Paul's
Krista.
Clare Kuehn.
Welcome,
Tracy
please
Twyman.
like, share, subscribe, or don't forget to share, like, or tweet it out on your Twitter or other social media platforms.
Yes.
See, we already got someone who was mad about waiting.
Well, we didn't keep you waiting for nothing. Think of the best rock and roll concert you've ever been to. Did they come right out on time, or did they stay backstage, get loaded, and make you wait?
We weren't getting loaded.
No, we were not getting loaded, that's true. Well, at least Tracy wasn't.
I tried to wait till the last hour for that.
I was getting loaded on anticipation.
Hey, it's the Adventurer Channel. Shout out to the Adventurer Channel, who shouts us out all week on YouTube with awesome, interesting corollary videos, similar ideas, and topics and subject of discussion. So go check him out and subscribe. The Adventurer Channel.
The Adventurer Channel.
I said the Adventurer Channel. Special effects thanks to your donations, folks. Find the link in the description and donate to me, Tracy, and Jim now.
Give me a hand signal or something. I'll do it.
This.
Yeah. Got it.
Greetings, America.
Universal Agent.
People here waiting for us. Thank you for being patient. It took us a little bit of technical difficulty to get our special guest ready on the Google Hangout, but she is, well, I see her back with us, so let us do a little promoting live via our smartphones, and then we will push the button and introduce you. So be patient, wait with us, listen to Adam Lower. Thank you.
What a wonderful Wednesday. So excited. This is going to be fun, you guys.
It's Wednesday.
It's gonna be the best Wednesday ever.
Mario Paint is over. That's correct programming language in the chat. Poop does not equal food.
Unless it's that coffee that they feed to certain cats and then...
Yeah, it's like I before C, E except after C, right? There's always some stupid exception to the rule.
Bobcat Goldthwait.
You know, if the poop coffee makes you poop, you're pooping poop.
That's why the people that don't tune into Picture Show are missing out.
What a shitty sentiment. Especially when you get tired from pooping poop, you're pooped.
Okay, it's gone too far.
This week it's Art's Only Picture Show.
What is the link that people need to go to see this?
SB Alger's YouTube. So I can I'll zap it to your private Twitter also, Claire.
Is it the same link you sent to me?
No.
No.
The Hangout.
If you drop that one on your Twitter, anyone that wants to get into our private conversation will be allowed. So
I meant youtube.com/c/SBALGER.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I sent you a link to your Twitter, Claire.
Yes.
I added.
Tag my mom this week. It's her fault I like the Beatles.
I don't know anybody who doesn't like the Beatles, actually.
I do. I know some people that just hate the Beatles. Just hate them.
Really?
Yeah.
Are they Rolling Stones?
Yeah. The rule is actually that you're either an Elvis fan or a Beatles fan. That's the old-fashioned rule amongst musicians. Beatles and Rolling Stones, you can like both, but almost no one says, well, I like Elvis and the Beatles. It's one or the other.
I wonder if Elvis liked the Beatles.
Elvis had kind of a love-hate relationship with the Beatles. He saw that they were taking his spot, and so he wasn't very pleased with them.
I think Frank Sinatra hated the Beatles too.
Oh, I bought a Blu-ray black and white copy of The Manchurian Candidate. Made me think of you, Tracy. We haven't watched it yet, but I'm gonna watch it with a legal notepad. No, not her. It's bad enough to tag the wrong person on Facebook just in a average post, but you don't want to tag the wrong person on Facebook we are on our conspiracy show. I guess it wouldn't be that big a deal. But
We're up to 25.
25 people are already waiting. That's it.
Already
I'm backing out. I'm nervous. Hey, it's Harrison. Hi, Harrison. We'll see you in the chat, Harrison.
Hi, Harrison.
I'm gonna get some water. Can't do this show with about 75 beverages.
I know.
Me either. My hair is horrible today.
No.
All right, maybe one more song here, and then we'll call it a start.
My stupid hair. It's not cooperating. It has a bulge at the top. I'm sorry.
Mine used to do that, but not anymore.
Yeah, you have a bald at the top, not a bulge.
Now I can let bankers sign documents on top of my head.
Yeah. Watch what they're signing.
That way I'm ahead of them.
At least he'll know right away when they forge something. Where are you all located?
We're in Walla Walla.
It's beautiful up there.
Yeah, I mean,
They can hear. They can hear us.
They
Talk?
can hear us. It's like the curtain still being closed, but noises backstage are on. So,
Oh.
but don't worry, it's a really long show. I really doubt that not many people are gonna watch the rerun and pluck too many details.
Oh.
We have a pretty good audience.
And honestly, if it comes down to that, we can get in a private conversation and make amendments once it's published. So,
That might be nice. Thank you.
yep. All right. Or people asking, oh, hey, occult fan. Hi, occult fan. For people asking about the Discord server, there is a link at the very bottom of the description of the current show that you're in.
Is that link still hot?
Yeah, I made a brand new permanent link.
Nice.
And I'm going right now over here. I'm going to pause this. We're not going to listen to Apple Tree. Okay.
No apple tree.
Nope. We're going to go live right now. If I can just find the Discord. I'm going to push the button and it's going to be all three of us. Except for I'm kind of adult. Come on, SB. Get it together, man.
Come on, SB.
There we are. And hi, everyone. Welcome to RX Only Picture Show number 41. I'm SB.
This is Jim.
This is
Okay,
Jim.
hi.
On the screen now, you see our special guest, Clare. Please pronounce your last name so I get it right, Clare.
Kuehn.
Kuehn. Okay, Clare Kuehn is joining us this week to talk about the Paul is Dead Beatles conspiracy, and she has a pretty substantial degree of expertise in this area. The interview I heard, she said she's been doing it since 2010. Correct me if I'm wrong, Claire. So,
That's correct.
So that's the plan. We want to talk about the Paul is Dead conspiracy. I've got some slides I can pop up when we're ready. But if you wanted to start just by giving people a general introduction of what you want them to know about you, maybe tell them your website. The website and the Twitter are in the description, just so you know. But anything you want to say just to let us know who you are, Claire, we're ready.
Oh, good. Hi, everybody. Hi, Jim, SB, and Tracy again. Well, you'd like the background, the intellectual background that drew me to this?
Yeah, well, I think your intellectual background is really interesting and cool to me. I mean, that you come from it from a really academic way, and how you got into it, of course. I mean, I don't know if you know, but me and Jem are both flat earthers, and I got into flat earth by trying to debunk it. And so I thought I remembered that you said that that's how you got into this, was trying to debunk it. So.
Yes, I did, and I've tried to stay off flat Earth shows.
We don't really focus on flat Earth. We don't. I mean, it's.
No, I'm saying that for anyone who doubts what I have to say because of it, but it is a separate discussion. Therefore, I'm not going to enter into it.
Yep.
But it's certainly not for anyone who is a high end, used to debates and discussions that are collegial. It's very important that people remain, even if they're very angry, they remain friendly about disagreements so that everyone's listening. So I'm certainly not coming on here to do anything bad about flat Earth, but I did have to say I don't happen to take that one on. The issue about the Paul McCartney conspiracy issue is that, as I was saying, probably better off air. Now I'm having a moment. I did get into it to debunk it, but I came into it with a great degree of experience in what's called alternative history, or I call them controversies, cultural controversies. So that could be everything from, is a certain war, is it a legitimate war? What political position do you have? All the economic issues, which actually are conspiracy plods. They plod along, but they also have plots involved. So I already had quite a bit of experience looking at those issues from different sides and hearing all kinds of supposed weirdos talking about these things. So I certainly was extremely open-minded. But I did come from a fairly strict academic background. Both parents were college professors. One was in the philosophy of science, which doesn't just mean physical science. It also means how do we know things in law and history? How do we know any question that is about the physical world, or even how you would test the supernatural world, and what kinds of questions should you raise? That's the philosophy of science. So it's a huge discipline, and my mother was involved in that, and logic. My father was more involved in history, the disciplines of geography, political history, economic history. They were both wide readers. And my mother in particular was always very interested in the biggest questions, such as, what about the Shroud of Turin, right?
Yeah.
What about claims about the pyramids? Now and also various issues like, what is the historical evidence for King Arthur or a Garden of Eden? And let's say it's an excellent hypothesis. Do we know yet? So it's always like, read this, think about this. This is a fascinating hypothesis, fascinating argument. May be true, but learn about it before you judge. And so this is the kind of attitude that I had. And it was not rigorous about official learning. I mean, I was expected to know what was supposed to be true, but to also engage in what might be also true by the same standards. So people who were marginalized but did have a high level of argument or evidence, then what do they have to say? So there are theological arguments and there are physical arguments and so on that my parents were engaged in. They also were very creative people. And this came, I personally did sculpture, painting,
That's what
drawing.
Jim's a sculptor.
Oh, good. Hey, I love sculpture, the best. Okay, I love it.
And
But
that's
having said that, I love Van Gogh too. Okay, so dance, theater. So they were interested in the play acting of an idea, right?
Awesome.
How do we express ourselves? And we might get into some of this because in this particular case of the Paul McCartney replacement and death, there are issues of body movement, of emotional tendencies. That includes when expressions are made and what is possible to repeat. So there are certain things you can act and you can get into it and even do some of that naturally, like it becomes almost natural. But there are certain things that will not be natural to a person who is acting. So these are interesting issues. So that is part of my background. Now, how I came to this, I came to it through the Kennedy assassination originally, because my mother had read Mark Lane as a student in the 60s. She had never concluded anything, but she said, my goodness, I think there's something here. And I moved forward with that and looked up what the current research is. And I came back to her and I said, it's solved. It's 99% known what happened on the day, and it's probably about 85% known in terms of all aspects. And she said, you cannot possibly tell me that you would be willing to conclude such an issue. And that's where we differed. I'm willing to conclude at a certain point. I do think at a certain point evidence settles down. And this is a big difference between me and some of the other Paul is dead. They're called researchers. We could call them students of the case. We could even call them experts. Okay, so inquiring minds.
Is that the root? Is that the root of the name of your blog then? Because remind me, but it's like, yeah, just tell me the name again because it slipped my mind now.
The name is You Can Know Sometimes,
right.
and I did that because of a double meaning. There's you can know sometimes, but you have to be careful how you do it. And then of course there is. You can know sometimes. There are cases that are truly indeterminate as of yet. And so what I was going into in terms of my background from the family and the experience, we all bring an experience to what we look at, is that some people will have a more appropriate experience. And I do believe that my experience in these things is extremely well suited for this sort of thing because I have read so many cases carefully through history. Let's say King Arthur, for example. I took a whole course on the evidence for King Arthur, and of course what it was also was just different things that were written and they weren't all evidence for him. And you know, what is it to say something has a 30% chance of being correct, but then cumulatively it has a 100% chance of being correct? How does that happen? So these are the sorts of questions that I was always engaged in. I also have a background in Latin, ancient history, because these things are relevant to, I think, a person who wants to see time as continuous. I don't see the almost 53-year-old death of Paul McCartney, 52 and a half years as we speak here today. I don't see that. And of course, today is February 2019, so almost March. So it's been 52 and a half years. He's dead. That is my position. He's a long dead. This is the position. You have to actually erase him from your mind, not around. Now, this doesn't mean I'm right, but that is the emotional tone if it's true. It also was a very grisly death, so we're dealing with something that you wouldn't want to see. Okay, so that's what I hold in my head, even if it's a delusion. That is the picture and emotional tone. So my point is 52 years is nothing when I'm often dealing with 17th century France, maybe 16th century, 12th century. My degree was in medieval studies, Jesus issues around the 3rd and 2nd century AD. Then you go back to the Egyptians, and before that into the question of, was there a cataclysm in 10,000 BC? So now you're dealing with Pleistocene issues. And so what I'm saying is my mind is not limited to, hey, it happened today and that's what's important. I think it's important also to get big intellectual issues straight. But I admit, of course, it doesn't mean that that feeds your dog or gives you a good night's sleep. It's just that they are relevant. You know, we don't have to be fanatic, but they're relevant to the questions if you're interested in questions. So that's sort of how I approach it. I don't know if you have any other questions. So
No, that's great. And so I'm curious about you said that, so your actual research into conspiracy maybe started with JFK and you and your mother differing on having a difference of opinion, and that foundationally the difference of opinion being, well, not just for JFK, but in general, it sounded like that you're willing to draw conclusions and say, okay, I've made a choice and I say the weight of the evidence rests here, and I think that solves it, you know, or at least solves it enough to get away from zero answer and a question mark. You know, maybe there's details to be worked out still, but you know, with JFK, did you think it was definitely a conspiracy then?
Well, the second part of that is yes. The first part of it is very important. To be fair to my parents and anyone who is deeply, who has probity about an issue, truly, actually is a skeptic, right? Keeps not only mind open, the idea of skepticism was to question your own inner emotional state about your own position as well. This is something that professional skeptics, the skeptical societies, tend not to encourage. It does not mean they don't have wonderful points and you shouldn't work with skeptics, but I think we all know.
No,
that
I agree.
I
agree. I would totally.
They tend to take a smug position. My parents' position was usually not smug, but they're, to be fair to them, they spent their days trying to get people out of coming to quick conclusions. They spent their days pointing out, you know, the Greek philosophers, you know, now I'm forgetting, oh dear, now I'm not doing my mother justice. The expression of it was Plato or Aristotle, where, you know, something like, basically don't conclude, you know, I'm forgetting the wonderful phrase, I'm sorry, it's
okay,
late in the evening.
It's okay.
But the point is, and they repeated this to me, but my mother also had, especially, my dad has a wonderful heart, so it's certainly not going to, I'm not trying to give him short shrift here. But my mother, when she was alive, and she's now dead, her attitude, despite her rage at someone coming to that conclusion that maybe they were being fanatic. I mean, this was what I was always, don't be a fanatic. You know, don't close your mind, you know, really ask about that. And okay, that of course was a very hard lesson to learn, because if you learn it deeply, it isn't about just keeping your mind open. It is about knowing when you can conclude something, but always saying, I know also what evidence or what types of arguments I would be open to, and I am actually willing, even if I never have to, change my mind. Now, that is different than I'm willing to change my mind. On Paul's death, I will be honest, I'm not willing to change my mind. But that's not because I'm not willing in principle. I'm willing to look and understand any other position. But I actually know that the kinds of things that are occurring here are not normal for anything other than what I'm claiming. Now that is, I know that's a grand claim, but I'm saying that is how I see it. Now my mother's approach was, and it's a very important approach for anyone, so I'm speaking for my wonderful mother who's dead, that you must deeply understand a position, including an official position, regular science, methods, and conclusions, before you start actually saying that science should not be applied here, or that the scientific decisions made by a lot of scientists are wrong because they did not apply all methods, or they did not have all evidence at their hand, or they got too emotional too early and they didn't make the right decision, because science is as much scientists as it is the actual doing of the work. Richard Feynman, the incredible American physicist, for what he was, constantly was asked questions. As, I don't know. Why are you asking me? Now, that is a much more honest position for a great mind than to say always I know. But he also would say he knew certain things given the parameters of the question asked. He knew certain answers were true, just as, of course, Newton and so on. They knew that the math worked. They didn't necessarily know what it was physically. They knew that the math worked. So before we're going to assess photographs, in the case of Paul, before we assess photographs and we say something looks fishy or doesn't look fishy, that's an impression. Very important to use your intuitive qualities of your emotions. But you also have to then learn something about photographic science. There are distortions in regular lenses, and sometimes much more obvious. There are faked elements in any such case. So my historical background says spies have been at it forever. Cultural propaganda and art have been entwined forever. Evildoers have been entwined forever. The only issue is it happening now here in my bunch of people, or roughly my time period, or my sex, my age, my color, right, my country? And did it happen in this specific instance? So those are really the questions. For me, the question of conspiracy was never an issue. We know that bodies turned up in the Tiber River in the Renaissance, and it was basically known. It was a reasonable assumption. Hey, that was the brother of so-and-so Borgia or so-and-so Medici. Yeah, they're taking care of their own.
Definitely,
so this is not something that we are trying to prove in court, where very specific people have to be very specifically charged, very specifically, right? It's not that. What we're saying is, can you know? Can you have enough to say, I know this, and never have to change my idea on that? That's what we're saying. And also, I always recommend never to go to court in these cases. Because in any of these cases, historically speaking, you won't get anywhere. And there are many, many ways that interference is done, and it's a further conspiracy. There are threats, there are bribes, but there also are people who do not know or do not want to conclude a certain discussion. My brother, de Medici, wouldn't do that or whatever. And then, so they also cause a problem. So some of conspiracy is not the plotters. This is a very important issue. And some of it isn't even criminal. It can be an attitudinal conspiracy against certain ideas, certain political stripes, certain sects or whatever. So these are I know I said it fairly concisely, I think, even though it took a while, but it's so many things there are required for a person to properly understand these cases. So my mother's issue was this. She had read about it. She hadn't kept up on the case. And I came across the final assessments about the Zapruder film and the photo fakery that was done in it. And it was actually a process where it was hinted that it was probable. The extent of it wasn't known. And an optics expert did the only tests that mathematically could prove that there were, in fact, optical problems in the film. And that meant that those frames in the middle of a supposedly coherent film, again, you have to know these things, a supposed single film strip had frames that were physically impossible on any planet by any camera, never mind that it was a specific camera. At that point, reading that scientist, that optics scientist's assessment, reading the debunker attempts, and going back and reading that scientist's rebuttals to them, I said, we know this. Yeah. And at that point, I said, what else is there to be known in this case? And I moved from that to some really wacky, weird stuff, and ultimately came to the Paul case with my basic historical understanding that conspiracy is normal, but having done a lot of thinking about modern and ancient cases since I had started on the Kennedy case, and I said very quickly in this case, something is up. I don't know yet whether it is Paul died, but it gosh darn looks like it. And I would like to know if this is true, but I've fallen for another one. So that's kind of
Well,
an
I think we
encapsulation
all
of
had
the-
that feeling
yeah.
before, Claire, of the I've fallen for it. Like, oh no, am I really gonna start researching yet another conspiracy? Should I even do this?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Before,
So I'm a
before you
reluctant,
carry,
I'm a
before you
reluctant
carry
traveler.
on, I want to make sure that Tracy doesn't have any preliminary question, because I know that I can tell that now. That was maybe a long. My microphone, pardon me. That was maybe a long introduction to get to actually starting on Paul. But just in case Tracy had anything to interject or add before you give us the details, because I'm pretty curious what the so. You gave us how you got right to it, but was there one thing particular that got you looking closer? But before you answer that, I want to give Tracy a chance to say something just in case. I couldn't. Did you want to throw anything in there first, Tracy?
I just wanted to sort of craft that question to lead into that. Is like I wanted to say, yeah. Well, do you remember what's the first trove of information that you looked at? And what was the first evidence really that you were evaluating when you started this? And what year is this, by the way, when you started looking at Paul?
Well, as SB, it is SB, right?
Yep, that's me.
Yeah. Okay. That's you. As SB said, it was around 2010. It was 2010-ish that I got into this, but it was 2008 when I seriously got involved in the Kennedy issue. So there were 2 years I was ill, and I spent about 10,000 hours. I was able to do that. And I also, of course, already had this great background, which I think is very necessary for a person who's going to be absolutely solid on these issues to at least have some grasp of what is implied by saying these things. So that's why I went into it. In 2008 to 2010, I got involved with Dr. Jim Fetzer. Not that I agree with him on everything, but he is at least, and in fact extremely, very open to, as I am, the fact that differing opinions must be aired. And that includes when he's uncomfortable. And now he doesn't always stick to it. But his real effort is, look, we need to hear these opinions out. And that, of course, that's a very deep intellectual, emotional honesty. It's a very hard thing to do. So in 2010, what drew me in? I do not recall if it was just constantly running into it. Like, how you're doing some work on, I'll use Kennedy. I'll try to stay only with Kennedy and Paul, because otherwise people might think that I'm as broadly aware as I am. And for some people that would actually turn them off.
Well, not in our audience, Claire. So that's...
Well, but we never know who will tune in. So what I will say is, the Kennedy case and the Paul case, there was quite a transition in the middle of that, and a lot of deep, I would say, conversion experiences, but they were not, of course, just one moment. You have, let's say, kind of an intense, oh my goodness, I think I might have to buy this. And then there are the fallout avalanches of, well, really, do I want to? And what about this other stuff? So I in that process, I, of course, heard from time to time about the Paul thing. And in my more radical skeptical doubt about it, I wasn't taking it seriously during those years. But what I can admit about my childhood and young adulthood, I was born in 1973. I was not a person who was around when Paul or the Beatles were together. One of my early-ish memories is John dying, but and I never related to the second Paul. I had a natural dislike. Again, I don't mean, he has no boyish side that I would like, but I did not like him. And I thought something was wrong. I just lost it. Lost almost all of the youthful charm, almost all of the fun, and almost all of the natural dance-like reaction, which even someone who's very old, who has that tendency, even who takes drugs and gets really depressed and angry, still has moments where what would have been a quick movement, let's say, of the head or of the body in youth is a relatively quick movement in age. Okay, so what you have a slowing down, but it is for the age group still more lively in so many ways. And I didn't respond. Also, of course, the later Beatles period wasn't something that a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old was mostly being shown or given in those years anyway, because that was seen as the drug culture or the ugly stuff, the sexual stuff, the adult stuff. I liked some of it, but mostly I was listening to the earlier Beatles. And I found them fresh, wonderful, open, extremely danceable. As I said, I was actually going to be a dancer, so I danceable and not just simplistic, although that is what everybody said. Everybody said that is too innocent. They grew up, and I was devastated. I thought that I was just a simple ingenue. I was a person who was this, simpleton. I was just the stupid preteen girl, whatever. I did it to myself. And what I've learned, of course, is that, and I can now express this better than I could at age 4 or age 15, but my feeling is that some of it is simplistic, but the work itself is complex. The work of those early Beatles songs, though they have some of the 50s influence, and there is something incredibly new also happening. And it is, as I think it was Sting, I think Sting said it. He was in a locker room. He was alive in the 60s as a teen or a young man. And he said, everybody stopped in the locker room when I Want to Hold Your Hand came on. Or it was Please Please Me. I can't remember which one it was, but everybody stopped. This was not just people who were going to get into music. This was not girls. Something was different. And it wasn't just that the Beatles were friendly, because these people didn't hear that. This is coming in as a music on the radio. So what I'm trying to get at here in my little preamble about what got me into it is I always sensed, felt, emotionally blocked certain aspects because of that. The difference. And I also was, unlike some of my friends who are like about 70 now, my best friends are 70 and 73. Unlike them, I had an access to the movies. I had access, I saw already, it was historical, right? It was on the TV or whatever. So I had seen Magical Mystery Tour. I had seen Beatles clips. I don't know where, but I'd seen them. They'd been played at parties. So I'd seen the green eyes of Sir Paul. I had seen that he didn't look quite right, but then I saw a little clip in there where he, and it turns out it's Paul posthumously, he looks like Paul. And you see, so they were doing a comparison. So I knew of the works. And in the 60s, when Paul died, this is the first major point in the case to raise. When Paul died, many people, especially in the US, did not have access to many of the films and many of the news clips. They actually were not seeing a lot. We now can compile it, and because I came after, I was born after, it was historical to me. So I had it available, but they didn't have it, and by that point they'd lost interest or they had bought the lie.
Right.
I also could not tell the voices. The voice sounded different, but then occasionally it sounded similar. You see, so I already had a kind of, something's wrong, but I thought this conspiracy issue will not be true. So when I was looking at conspiracy issues, and I was looking into this one, I thought, oh, that's crazy. The thing that I decided to look at was the art clues, because they were misrepresented. The idea was that you can find stars and bars and stripes and faces anywhere. Right? Especially in clouds. And you can see anything, and I've actually observed this among some fellow PIDers. But that isn't actually what the rumor claimed. The rumor was actually much more specific. There were certain things in the albums, on the artwork, or in the booklets, or in the videos, or in the comments that were done, and not others. They weren't claiming just anywhere the way that some people are claiming now in sloppiness, I would propose. So I began to realize right away from my art background and art historical background, at least I know that these PI deers are being misrepresented. That did not mean they were correct, but it meant they were being misrepresented. And then in late 2010, this is the actual final answer to what brought me in directly and launched my career, as they call it in this, intellectual career. In late 2010, the I Am a Phony group, which needs discussing in its own right, came out with a major movie. For about 5 years, they had come out with little videos, and
Now,
they've
hold
been
on. I don't
supplying
think I've heard of that
evidence.
group. Let
Pardon?
me interrupt you for just a second. So there's a group that's specifically related to the Paul is dead phenomenon, and they're called I Am a Phony, and so they're going around taking a particular set of positions, and you said they're making a movie. Is that right?
Well, actually, what it looks like is that Neil Aspinall, who was the Beatles roadie along with Mal Evans, okay, now this has been traced. The money that he was giving for special projects gave out about, I think it was £200,000 or something, right at the point when the I Am a Phony group began to do their high-end video series in 2005. And there is a high likelihood that it was a project from Apple. And there's so many arguments towards this, such as they're not censored, they're not taken down, they have lots of Beatle music and Beatle images in there. Okay, that's one argument. Another argument is this money tracing. Another one is the absolute sophistication of the music produced. Actually, it's quite beautiful. The music produced and the imagery. I've done video editing. It is, to swear, damned hard.
Yes, it is.
I mean, to take and to stretch an image just as long as a different audio, and then that's only 3 seconds, and this goes on and on, where all of this has been done. What kind of money, what kind of expertise, time, energy went into this? So there's a lot of arguments that the I Am a Phony group, whoever they are, were people in Apple wanting to disclose without giving the absolute talk on the 5 o'clock news and it would have to be not just, hey, you know, this is true and everyone laughs. It would have to be, no, stop laughing, I really mean it.
Yeah, right.
Like, it would have to be at that level for it to be revealed. So they do everything but that. But it's extremely complex. And in 2010, they came out with a movie. And the movie does not have everything that was in their little video clips over 5 years, but it does have a lot of it. And it has some other things, and it's a wonderful movie. It's called The Winged Beetle, okay? And it raises Crowley. It raises Satanism. It raises issues of deep perturbation and desolation among the Beatles. There are a couple of clips that you could call disingenuous or fake. What they did is they took John Lennon, who never actually said, yeah, you know, Paul died, yeah, he really did. And they took a few clips that suggested that, but where he was talking about something else, to make the point as though, as you're watching it as a kind of a narrative, this is what it feels like to know. Now, other people have said, no, that proves it's a fake. But I think everything else proves it's not a fake. And therefore, what they were doing is doing an emotional tone to the movie by putting in a few wrong clips. That movie, right at the beginning, has sinister music, which I knew, of course, from the feelings of sinistrality. I knew them from this work in conspiracies over the years. And I had suffered many times learning what I learned. So the movie starts with the sinister music. My stomach dropped, and I said, oh, gosh, you know, ooh. And very quickly, they showed a slow motion clip of Sir Paul McCartney. He's McCartney number 2. Okay, so Paul, I don't like calling him Paul. He's not Paul. So I don't like giving him Paul's name, but
no, so you're gonna give him the Sir title. So anytime you say Sir Paul,
exactly.
You're talking about
yes,
the
even before
replacement.
he got the Sir, because that allows people to still maintain the name Paul, so that their preconceptions don't have to change all at once. They can get used to the idea.
That makes very good sense.
But it's not rude to the dead and replaced man, right? I mean, once you know, well, actually, even before you know, to be really impartial about something, you have to know how you're thinking about it. This is important. You have to say, all right, I'm not going to call something a doodle, I'll call it a drawing. I'm not going to call something a figment, I'll call it an idea. So that you actually are putting yourself in the right mind to see it and not have too much laughter before you're finished, even if you feel it. I felt it, I wasn't sure. So Sir Paul went on Letterman show in 2009. And there's actually a reason he did, which I'll wait to talk about if you want to get back to. And in that, he screwed up. He was supposed to be asked a question about the Paul death scenario, and he was in I'm going to tell you how I see it, okay? So I'll give you my emotional theater about it, my play acting of how it is, instead of always saying, this is the postulate, or this is what I believe. Okay, so he goes on there, and he's supposed to be saying things to cover up the fact that in Italy, the two forensic scientists had just come out, in Italian, unfortunately, in Wired magazine, unfortunately, though they do cover some good stuff, but it wasn't a forensics mag, saying, we have decided that Paul McCartney is dead. He's not the same man. But we'd kind of like some input from Sir Paul because we don't really like our
So wait, they published it in Wired magazine in Italian that they were postulating he was actually dead?
Well, that they concluded.
Because of DNA testing, is that right?
No, because of the photos, because
Okay.
of proper photo analysis, knowing what bone structures do, and that kind of thing. Now, they actually made a few slight errors with the photos, but it was a serious attempt, and they have not written up their full assessment. But this was kind of written up as an interview of them, a serious article that came out in August 2009. And in August 2009, Sir Paul, within the same week, goes on Letterman, and for the first time in years, allows, because these people allow questions, he allows Letterman to ask him questions on PID. And that took the news instead of the Wired Italia article.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yep.
I submit that was deliberate. Okay, so he goes on
Absolutely.
and he's asked, and most of the time he's emotionally just the way I am, very blocked. Not extremely emotional, but, kind of loud. Oh, yes, it was strange. Okay? And then Letterman asked him a certain question. Now, Mike Williams, who is another, has a platform in PID, calls himself a researcher, so we'll call him a researcher in the case. Mike Williams, who is out there now, he takes the idea that somehow Bill was giving us a hint. Actually, when I Am a Phony showed, was that as the question was asked, Sir Paul was waiting for, you know how you get really riled up and you're waiting for that question? You're almost not listening to what was how it was exactly put.
Yeah.
Instead, you're just waiting for your moment. So you have something sort of ready.
Yep.
And you can actually, you didn't misspeak, but you were expecting the question in a slightly different format. And Letterman said, so yes, it was supposed to be that you had died and someone was living in your place or something like that. Now that's the closest to a proper statement of the problem that we usually get. Usually it's, are you dead? Okay, that's not the question. Right? We know he's not dead, he's talking. So in this case, it's slightly twisted, but it's basically that there was a replacement. It actually referred to the replacement. And Sir Paul is looking, and he's actually looking almost like a child, but waiting for his moment, and he has his finger up, and he's waiting, and I'm mimicking in a slightly mocking mode so that people can see the build-up. And then he says, well, this is him. Now, what had actually happened was, if you linguistically analyze it, the last him in the sentence was the person taking the place. But the beginnings of the excitement started and the need to answer started with the question about, I'm me, I'm still alive. So the referent, it's called, had switched in the sentence as it was actually presented. So it's, the idea was that Paul had died and that someone had taken your place, or it switched it around, and then this is him. which is too eager, and it's a screw up. And what I Am a Phony did is they slowed down the facial response. That's how the movie begins. And I know that there are different kinds of evidence that people want or respond to as a definite. But anyone who knows body language and has had trauma response or shock response knows that though you can slow down somebody's movement, sort of make them look a bit shocked or whatever, real shock that has been laid down at a previous point in time over many moments of traumatic experience and fears can be suddenly triggered, and the entire musculature drops. I'm not talking about you running and your face goes up and down.
No, I understand
and
exactly
down.
what you're talking. I mean, it's a physiological response in the body. If someone calls you and gives you horrible news,
it is a reveal. Exactly, it's a reveal.
Tell.
And also with it, eyes darting too quickly to mimic, and lip licking that is all together. Okay, so what it was his face dropped. I mean, we're talking, like, I don't mean I look serious. If somebody paused that, I look serious. I'm talking like on 1 second, whew, like I can't mimic it exactly how it is because it's an autonomic response. And the eyes were darting like this, the tongue was licking, and then he turns his body more robotic. And he looks up to Letterman. I'm doing it sort of slowly. Looks up and, save me. And Letterman said, or is it?
Yep.
And puts his hand over his mouth as not only a Freemasonic sign of shut up, but also a general sign of there's a secret.
Right. Now, wait, doesn't Sir Paul also, doesn't he follow Letterman's lead and put his fingers over his mouth too? I've seen this clip.
Well, he does then, because then he can be kind of cute. Now, if you have ever blocked a trauma moment, if you've ever been caught out, I mean, I think everyone has, but I don't know. You will know that your body responses change from autonomic to conscious actions. They feel different to you, but they also look a bit different. They don't always look different. As you may know, something can mimic or seem like something else, but they do actually have certain indicators. That in 2010, when I saw that, now I can't say I decided right then, fully knowing, because that would be unfair. And when we get to the disinformational or misinformational aspects of some people out there, I think it's important to know that they made decisions very early that were never fully dropped. Okay. But in my case, what I did is I said, even if I didn't know that, or hadn't seen that, or there was some other trauma that just came up, really radically, I'm going to act as if I did not see that. And then I can continue forward. But I had seen it. I did know what it meant. It meant at least trauma. But I also knew some people would not recognize that piece of evidence, and I continued. So that was kind of a linchpin moment. But as I said, I had from childhood been up to a point raised in the real Beatles trajectory.
Me too.
Okay?
Just so you know, I think
Beatles,
we're all pretty exposed to the Beatles here. I was joking with JEM and Tracy before we realized we were definitely going to have you on in private chat. That when I was a kid, I used to dance around in my underoos with my Dukes of Hazzard plastic guitar and practice to be John's replacement. You know, and I'm let's see, I'm just a little tiny bit younger than you, born in 1975, and you know, I've still got my mother's Beatles records, and so you know, we're all, I think we're all in a similar boat. We're all from a similar frame of mind of being exposed to the late part of the Beatles being, or I guess the Beatles being pretty dang popular, but transitioning into the more drug trippy phase when we were all children, and being exposed to and in the realm of our parents, aunts and uncles, whoever it might be, that these people would be of the, you know, that's the generation that actually experienced, you know, my mother and my aunt like supposedly like tried to call the hotel in Sacramento to get the Beatles on the phone, and like were hassling bellboys and stuff, when they knew they were in town and things like this. So
when they were real,
right,
okay, and
yeah.
this is the important point. We
Yeah, the
for
pop
people who
the pop
have
doo
not
wop
gotten
Beatles,
used
not
to
the
the
drug
PID
Beatles. Yeah.
issue yet.
I said, yeah, the pop Beatles, like you were talking about, when it was still bubblegum pop, like sing-song, dancey music. And I would agree with you, Claire, that the music's more complex than people give it credit for. It's not simple, but it is really earwormy, catchy music, and it is very, bop your head, dance, sock hop, 50s-esque. It's a true transition from the 50s into the early 60s there. That I Want to Hold Your Hand and Love Me Do, all these type of songs. The
later
transition
stuff,
from
weren't they trying to copy the Beach Boys basically?
Yeah, that's it is a very very similar style, and yeah, there's even theories that it's written by the same people. I don't want to get off on that tangent 100%, but that's the idea of it being complex. I understand what Claire's talking about, that they say, oh, well, that's it's such like crappy plain basic music, but if I'm a musician. It's not. It's if you want to go try and learn those songs and perform them, it sounds really simple until you're trying to play through it. It's not simple, but it's because that's the beginning of real, for lack of a better way to say it, of the real catchy brainwashing stuff that they've transitioned us into.
Yeah, I knew a music producer who was looking over some of their old footage one day when I was in the room with him, and he said, "Oh, they sound like Nirvana."
Well, remember that Kurt Cobain, he grew up on the Beatles.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah. See, it's the other way around.
Right. Of course
now,
it is. Yeah.
But that's my point. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a wonderful interview just to talk about calling it bubblegum pop. Okay, I have a problem with that, but I will explain why. I understand what you're getting at. I know what people are hearing in it if they're doing that, and even I can say, yeah, well, it's just wonderful. You feel like moving. But there was there's an interview in Ontario, Canada, on the Agenda years ago when it still ran. Steve Paikin, who's not a perfect interviewer, but he had on 3 people to discuss the Beatles CD issue when it first came out years ago, and one of them was a baby boomer gentleman who was a rock critic and so on. Another one was a young woman who played these things, played Beatles in a band, especially for weddings and so on. And the third was a person out there in the current music culture, just liked going to hear bands and wanted everybody to be in the now. Okay, so that's sort of what you have. Ignoring the 2 young women for the moment, although the first one I mentioned who plays them, she said it's actually extremely difficult and everybody loves it. You can say I'm not going to like it, but you start playing it, people start enjoying, despite their. They can try to be as if they're against having, it's not sophisticated. They actually do get into enjoying. Now, but this rock critic, what he said is this. He said, look, in my era, I was a Stones fan as opposed to Beatles. And they were originally more clean cut, but we saw, everybody pretty well was into the Beatles. We were the outsiders. We were going to stand against it. And the Stones did some amazing things, as he pointed out. But he said, for this interview, I prepared. I went and listened to every Beatles album so we could discuss it. And I don't think these 2, well, maybe the one who played them, but they hadn't gone and done that. He says, I listened to every Beatles album from start to finish. He said, whether there were moments of a little bit of chaos in there that I didn't like, he said, you start listening to this stuff, it's marvelous after marvelous. And so to call the bubblegum pop, and he said, I'm converted. He said, it was the music I was, or the scene or whatever that I was trying to resist. He said, but coming at it and hearing, there are songs there that you forget the Beatles did. Just suddenly, and you're like, oh, that one too. Oh, that one. Oh my God, that's beautiful. So the complexity is in the harmonies. It's also in some of the languaging, the matching of the language poetically to the rhythmic issue. For instance, one of my favorites, which is No Reply, is a very complex song to remember to sing because the word meanings go over the pause breaks. And then the emphasis is all together with major emphasis, and then it goes off again. It's like a syncopation. Now, it's not musical syncopation in the normal sense, but it is a poetical syncopation between the words, the meanings, the emphasis, and the beat. Never mind the harmonies and the ways that they are intoned, because sometimes it's this desperation, sometimes it's kind of the pleading, sometimes it's the sadness. So there's extreme complexities. And the reason for this is not that the Beatles were unsophisticated, though they were very famously not officially, they had not been trained formally in music, although they had a little bit of background of Paul, especially with his father playing early. But rather, they worked at it. I mean, their conversations as late teens and teens specifically was, have you heard this? It sounds a little like Elvis. Let's try that. So in that sense, they were training themselves, trainers about the mind.
So,
Mind
so you
Valley
definitely
Academy.
think that they wrote it then, Claire? You definitely think they wrote their own songs and their music? Because, I mean, that's speculated, too, as to whether or not... some people think that really it was George Martin behind him. Some people think it was yet another man. I know that Sage of Quay, Mike Williams, has some name that he drops sometimes that he says that's the actual songwriter. So it sounds to me like you're of the opinion that they are the songwriters, or at least really deeply involved in having the chance to call shots and be part of the songwriting process.
Oh yeah. In fact. Okay. That is a whole other issue. Then specifically that Paul died. But yes. Okay. First of all, I mean, we don't have time to go into every argument for these things. One of the main arguments that they wrote their songs. Now, this is at least until Paul was replaced. At the point when Paul was replaced, there is some. I'm going to say this very strongly. Forgive me. There is definitely. Forgive me for that moment. There is definitely recycling of previously composed and even in the canned songs. She's Leaving Home is one of them. Very specifically. That is Paul's voice. It is Paul's spirit, if you want to call it that, or modus vivendi. It is also George Martin's manner of writing strings from the year before with Eleanor Rigby.
I would definitely agree with that. That I mean, the strings on that song are. So you're saying that it was Sir Paul singing it, but that it was a song.
No, not She's Leaving Home. I believe that was in there as an early confusion and a posthumous credit. Later albums, other than Sgt. Pepper, and maybe for those who are not so familiar with the Beatles, you better get the time frame going here. Sgt. Pepper was done in the spring, summer-ish. It began to be recorded in late '66, December, but it was sort of spring, summerish that it came out in '67. Paul died before that. Okay, so just so that people have an idea. So for Sgt. Pepper, which I consider a mishmash and not a great album. Now, forgive me, people, because I know what's great about it and I know what's culturally great about it. But I'm talking about, and there are several revisionist Beatles scholars who also talk this way, who are not PIDers by any stretch of the imagination. They also talk about how Sgt. Pepper isn't quite as great as they thought it was, but boy, it had an impact. And boy, it was new and wonderful for what it did, and so on. And that's how I would take it. It's a mishmash. It's very much a compilation. The only thing that holds that together, really, is the bookend of the first intro songs of the band, and then the sort of traditional band-like Billy Shears song, and then at the end a reprise. You can see those as bookends.
Yeah.
Now when the Aeneid was written or sung or composed into book form, whichever it was, from the ancient Greeks, it was their Bible. Okay, and when it was done, the beginning and the end are bookends. They have mirroring qualities, and this has been long studied.
So let me
Those...
interrupt you for the audience, just so you know, because I mean I feel like there's a little bit of a nervous tension, Claire. Like maybe you're not used to being live, but Claire just compared Sergeant Pepper to the Ennead.
Sorry, not the Aeneid, the Iliad.
The
I'm
Iliad.
sure it's at the Greek, not the
And
Roman.
the reprise
Yeah.
of because I know that some people consider Sergeant Pepper to be the first real concept album. Now it's not the first one ever, but it is probably the first one that gained enormous popularity and then got a lot of copycatting or brought the idea of concept albums much more into view as far as rock and roll, so that, and I would say
Right.
that reprise is the main thing that lets you know that it's a concept album if you're not familiar with the idea in general. The idea that the first song comes back, it's reprised into something different, the tempo's different, the lyrics are different. This is
And
what...
it's shorter. It's
Yeah,
shorter.
that's what gives it away to the audience that's listening, that they've just been on a journey
Yes.
as opposed to just listening to an album, so...
Right, and of course the previous albums also, they picked songs for them and they tried to make them kind of, if you will, flow, and sometimes it didn't really flow together, but they're wonderful songs, as this baby boomer analyst, rock critic said. But no, yeah, and the only thing I'm comparing it to actually in the Iliad, and I misspoke saying the Aeneid, which was Roman, the Iliad for the Greeks. The only thing I'm comparing it to is the book ending.
Right.
The two, that it is a constructed impression that somehow this all made sense between these 2 points. When
Right.
you actually listen to it, the pieces are, I mean, they're not even a slight segue onto a different aspect. There's really almost nothing holding them together. You've got She's Leaving Home, which is a sensitive treatment of family breakdown and searching for yourself, and it's soft, and it's Paul. Okay, and then you have things like For the Benefit of Mr. Kite, which is extremely clever, a lot of tricks, and actually it's quite brilliant lyrically, but it is not as sensitive. Then you have the blaring quality of certain other songs. Then you have the sitar and the inner weird. It's not actually that psychedelic an album.
No,
it's not really.
I agree that it's not as it doesn't have the continuity that people act like it does. It looked like Tracy was trying. Did we miss a spot for you to ask a question there, Tracy?
No, I think we're on to something else. No.
Okay. And I'm seeing in the chat, so Claire, that I think people are definitely curious about the. I know you mentioned that you had started to pick up on symbolism and the correlation of art and things, maybe messages and clues being dropped in symbolism. Our audience and our focus is pretty esoteric and occult. So if you want to transition into some of the things that you consider to be really obvious examples, I wouldn't say not obvious, but what you would call undeniable examples of clues, hints, correlations, correspondences, I'm definitely curious to hear some of that stuff, and I know our audience would be too.
I do have a question actually may I?
Yeah, please go ahead, Tracy.
Okay, so we were talking about the Rolling Stones fans being perceived as a different crowd than the Beatles fans, even though I'm sure there's plenty of crossover. But I just find that interesting, considering that the Beatles put out these indications that they wanted to introduce the Rolling Stones to the public, or like that they were handing over the reins of something to them, with introduce the Rolling Stones being on, I think if it was in Sgt. Pepper, then maybe it was the cover of the Yellow Submarine album that came out with the movie. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, there's Rolling Stones, The Good Guys. I think it says on the Sgt. Pepper album cover. And of course, the actual historical relationship between the two bands, especially when Brian Jones was still alive, and that is another issue. which I'm not going to go into. But when Brian Jones and the Rolling Stones were, I mean, they were more London-based band, but they benefited really only because the Beatles had pushed the British bands as a concept into America. And so, you know, the actual historical relationship between the people is one thing, but what I was saying is that and they gave songs to them, and they worked together, and they were friends, and so on. Okay, and some of the Rolling Stones' early stuff, I mean, it is 50s to 60s transitional music. I mean, it is certainly not progressive or different in almost any way. I think the Beatles did it better, but that doesn't mean that they weren't both tight bands at the time, and they were friends. So what this fellow was saying is he was saying in his, you know, his crowd or the people of his age, the Beatles were everywhere. Everybody loved the Beatles, and he saw himself as the outsider tough who was going to be smarter than the rest of them, and he was going to like the Stones, and you know, that kind of an attitude. What he was saying is, coming from that position, I've had, of course, time over my life to appreciate many, many things. I'm a rock critic, right? I go to bands, and my life is not only music. But for this presentation and this discussion, this roundtable, I went back and listened. I listened with the kind of fresh ear that isn't absolutely fresh, but I listened with a determination to get through it all and really, if you will, almost like a book, read every word, sort of know what's in it, be a critical thinker, a critical experiencer. And he said, my God, I was carried away. And he wasn't talking about the later music. He was talking about, you know, song after song after song. And he said, you know, you can characterize it as bubblegum pop. It's not. It's absolutely marvelous, you know, investigations into the human spirit, doing them in 3-4 minutes at a time, not a you know, a 15-hour ring cycle by Wagner.
Right.
Yeah. But it is an investigation into the human spirit, and I'm familiar with both. I mean, I love you know, world music stuff. I love Debussy. I was raised on classical music much more, and opera and ballet, but I mean, the Beatles. It wasn't like, oh, now I can turn my brain off and just move. What it was this is marvelous, and it's good for my brain and my body and everything. And that's what I think the man was getting at, not the historical relationship between the Stones and the Beatles, which he didn't really get into.
Right. Yeah. I guess I was just wondering if there was maybe a you know, motivation behind them rolling out the Rolling Stones the way that they did.
Well,
at that particular time.
Well, they were friends, and they were on the similar record labels. Actually, Decca got the Rolling Stones, and the Beatles weren't picked up by Decca, but their wonderful early recording was on the Decca label, and then was passed off to Parlophone and, of course, EMI.
You know, Claire, I would say that the, you know, whether personally, I think it's intentional. Now, people will speculate, but I would say that they intentionally brought the Beatles out as the good guys and the Rolling Stones out as the bad boys. And whether, you know, I know people speculate whether or not it was completely manufactured. I would say that I think it is. They knew what they were doing before they published these guys on both sides. You know, with the, you know, the evidence of all these bands being connected to Tavistock is reasonable in my opinion. And I think they brought them out as, you know, the Beatles for all the young girls to fall in love with, and the Rolling Stones also, but the Rolling Stones being the ones that, like, because there used to be like buttons like, would you let your daughter date a Rolling Stone, you know, like in this kind of stuff. And so it's just like pro wrestling or any kind of performance art. The bands know that they're going to promote each other. They might even have some intentional rivalry. They might even have some real rivalry. But the bottom line is they want to sell a hell of a lot of records and get everybody in the youth culture thinking and adopting certain ideas and behaviors. You know, that's...
Well, I mean, this is a huge topic, and it takes us into sort of what I call the background issues to the PID, or Paul is dead position, or PWRRRRR, Paul was replaced, many of Pauls, or the Beatles, or wherever you go. Wherever you want to go with this, I'm calling it all PID because PID is the umbrella through which anyone would ever get to those positions. And you take any of this seriously at all, let's call it PID, even if you aren't technically saying he died. Now, in terms of the background issues, it may not be so good for most audience after your audience has listened to this, to go into this at this point. But as a cursory statement on that, I believe that the way to approach the biggest, worst, most planned out, or if you will, if not planned out, constant revised planning or intersociation of various unsavory people or nasty people or people we would tend to think would never do something like that, even if they're not nasty people. Okay, but to get at that background issue of just how bad it is, we have to be at least somewhat aware that a lot of how that works, maybe not all, but a lot of it is not actually planned. So that what you have is the Beatles very early on were told to straighten up and make themselves into pop stars so they'd have some saleability outside of Liverpool. And John resisted it. He wanted his black jacket, and they didn't look like a coherent group, and he didn't like the
uniforms. I remember that. I remember John not being fond of the uniforms and the
costuming. And of course, their beloved manager, who later also gambled their earnings away, Brian Epstein, who did love the boys, but was also, getting into some things that he probably shouldn't have gotten into. He was a gay man. He loved the boys and found them attractive in many ways, and liked them to be natty dressers. And I do think that is a sufficient. The argument at the point in the culture, 1961 or 2, asking them to wear suits. I mean, no band didn't, except those that were being absolute rebels and were
the bad boys.
And so John wanted to be a rebel that was almost uncontained, and that didn't work either, because even Elvis had an image.
I've got a question for you, Claire.
Pardon?
I've got a question for you, because you mentioned.
May I just finish the thought? Please hold it, but may I finish the thought on?
Please,
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So as this progressed, and the Rolling Stones too. I mean, they dressed nice at the beginning. As the big corporate wheels started turning, and I do believe the Beatles were asked into America partly as a psychological operation. I do not think they totally knew. Okay, I think that they were asked in. Because Kennedy had died, and there really were people who knew that it was a conspiracy that killed him, or that didn't know but really wanted to cheer up the public, and we really have to have something wonderful. So I think that there's a combination. I think Ed Sullivan probably really did see the lineups to go see the Beatles, and what the heck kind of act is this? But I also think that the approval, calling in Elvis the king of rock, to approve them like handing over the torch, that kind of stuff, I think, is where you see a hand of manipulation. But I think it really is uncareful to say the boys were simply only the good guys to the Stones' bad guys. I think they started off that way and couldn't drop it until Paul had died, and then there was kind of an opening to do something wild and new. So I think we have to be subtler about it. I think most of the history is correct. I think what happens is it edges and changes, sometimes drastically, but doesn't change everything. It changes your approach to certain things. That's how I see them. I do not see them as not innocents early on or writing their own music. I think what happened is people wanted a piece of the pie, and some of those people really were plotting, as David McGowan, before he was probably murdered, said in his book, Inside the LC, about Laurel Canyon,
Strange Tales from the Canyon.
Strange Tales from the
our
Canyon,
audience, so you know,
LC.
is pretty savvy.
He argues that there were actually spy rings, pedophilia, snuff films, international psychological operations, and sometimes competing ones going on to corrupt the people of that era, but also to run drugs and slaves, and also to corrupt the industry. So yes, but I don't think that was exactly the whole story about the Beatles. I think we have to be very, very careful not to put that in as they were, cognizant,
So-
and everybody was just trying
So,
to
Claire,
push them.
my question has to do with exactly what you just mentioned. You mentioned that Epstein, their manager, was a homosexual and that he was certainly fond of them more than just in a camaraderie way. And it made me think of the famous...
I don't blame him. I don't blame him.
the famous modern producer who produced all of these boy bands, and he was found out, I don't remember his name, but all these young boy bands, like whoever Justin Timberlake was in there, I can't think of their names. But so do you think maybe we're seeing preliminary evidence of a sexualization, grooming, maybe even hazing and molestation type of thing going on all the way back then with the Beatles? Because it was like found out and proven when it was like, who is Justin Timberlake? What's the band, Jim? Do you remember?
The band is NSYNC and Backstreet Boys. The guy is Louis J. Perlman.
There we go. So yeah, thank you,
Thank
Tracy.
you.
Yeah.
But so I mean, now I just wanted to table that. Like, it seems to me like maybe that's a bit maybe that goes back farther than up till now. We've had into the what I would call the Overton window. People are thinking, oh, that was back when things were more innocent and times were different. Maybe not.
No,
maybe.
I would make a distinction, and this is a distinction I make with probity. It is not a distinction I'm making off the cuff at all. I've thought about that. I've suffered, maybe. I think that there is enough evidence of the behavior of Epstein, and that includes a sexual encounter or more with John, if you look beyond the nice versions. Even his friend Pete Shotton said that John told him that something had gone on, and there were and so I think we have to be careful between the dynamics of the people in our case and what we know from the big picture. It's very easy to. I'm all for deductive reasoning, which you take a high position and you reason down from that potential. I think that's a very important part of reasoning. Then there's the inductive reasoning. Am I correct in the direction of those? I think so. Anyway, I'm forgetting now. It's late. The from the bottom up. The bottom up of evidence does not actually get you to the top. And the top down doesn't always guarantee you accuracy about the evidence. You can impose the wrong pattern. So what you need to do is kind of work these things over and combine them. And I'm doing that with my hands deliberately. For people listening to it on audio, I'm kind of holding them over each other like two overlays and saying, where do they fit? Where do they not? And how would they fit? And, where do the points match and where don't they match? Is it bottom up and top down?
I would call this transductive, wouldn't you? Instead of, people usually use deductive logic. What's the opposite of deductive? Inductive. And so what you're talking about is more of a transductive. It's not as well known.
I like that. Uberductive. I mean, or you're combining a biductive reasoning. I like
Epstein probably would have been okay with that, biductive, right?
I wish that people in these debates between atheists and Christians would talk about that, because what they are often talking about is who's going to argue top down, who's going to argue bottom up, but then it flips when the evidence from let's say the Christian, I've been listening to a lot of this lately, brings up evidence, and then the others have a squashing top-down argument, and then they both say they're only arguing from evidence, and oh, dear me. So a biductive, bivalve point of view about overlaying issues, and in fact, it also takes a lot of emotional strain. To do this right, this is why I gave a long introduction about myself at the beginning, and we had the time to do it, is that it is actually a very strainful thing to be open-minded, but then to be closed-minded and then reopen it and do the comparative and say, I had an impression, and oh my God, and then you go, or maybe not, and then you have an impression, and maybe not. You have to be as excited when you have that impression as you have to be willing to take it away. And the people who sit arms akimbo and are never willing to be excited because it just might lead them to a wrong conclusion are doing it wrong too. Because what the cops work on when they are not being corrupted, it just doesn't look right. Yeah, it just doesn't look right. Now, that does not prove the case, but it is very important to allow that and follow it and be moved by it. Because very often, number one, you remember more about the case if you're enthusiastic for it and you already believe it. So you actually help you remember. Number two, you notice things and you work out aspects that you probably would not have bothered to work out if you were taking a more surface level and waiting for the very best evidence to appear that you thought was the best evidence when you started out, and the reasoning you thought you would need for that case. If you actually engage with it and pretend you really believe it for a while,
oh, yeah,
you can do that.
We're in this audience. You gotta understand that our audience, the people, especially the regulars that tune in, what you're describing is like this is our regular cup of tea. We're all able to embrace an idea and go with it, and then give it up and throw it under the bus and change our mind. So I want to draw it back to the idea of symbolism. I know that when I listened to your interview with Mike Williams, you pointed out like some stuff about the bass drum head. And so if you wanted to go with some of the most far out symbolism you think that you found, and we're not stuck on Paul is Dead, you know, we can digress and go on to other things, and it's fine. Because I know Tracy has excellent work on Yellow Submarine. So if we want to digress into Yellow Submarine, that's great. But I think for our audience that the symbolism that you found maybe in Sgt. Pepper, etc., I think that would be a great place to jump into, Claire.
Sure. Okay, well, I'll segue back because if I can take a minute to get out, I wasn't quite finished. The reason that I go into this is that although a lot of people think they do these things, they don't actually carefully, deeply do them, and we don't know who will be watching. And these are the kinds of philosophical issues. And I also mean emotional issues. I mean, philosophy deals also with, really it's kind of not just mind stuff. It's the emotions that it takes to do the work. People are very confused about this stuff. They're confused about what is best evidence, what is a proof, how do you keep an open mind, what is an impression, and so on. So I think it's important, because I've done a lot of thinking about it, to raise those issues in a as clear a way I can, as I can, and to present them for whoever is watching. Now, back to Epstein, also the segue there, just to finish that off, I believe that Epstein was mostly what he seemed to be. I believe that the history is extremely indicative of so many normal things. Until Paul dies. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't some abnormal things, that there aren't corporate and even cultic efforts. And of course, the casting couch for children exists. It exists in a different way, as Corey Feldman said, but it exists. These kinds of things were going on. Your issue about innocent in the past time, no. But that there is innocence in a lot of interactions, especially between Epstein and the boys. Because Epstein, even though he took a sexual interest, and I don't blame him, many girls and boys would agree, the Beatles were rather attractive in many ways. Even Ringo, with his funny looks, was attractive. Okay, so Epstein comes in and he is moved, and there is nothing else to signal that these young men, except that they were rocking the Casbah, as you might say, rocking the cavern. So I think it's important to maintain a certain basic normal stuff going on in order to look. One of the Christian discussers, John Lennox, a mathematician from Cambridge and emeritus.
He's the Paul is Dead guy.
Hmm?
He's the Paul is Dead guy. John Lennox, you said his name is?
No, he's a Christian defender whom I've been listening to recently, an older man who has been discussing with people like Christopher Hitchens, the atheist.
I see.
And,
so a Christian
okay.
apologist. Okay, I understand. Go ahead.
Yes, and they are atheist apologists. Right. Apology in this case means the Greek word meaning defender.
Yeah.
Rather than.
Not to say sorry, to explain.
It's actually opposite.
Right.
Okay. So when you defend something and you try to give your excuse, you are apologizing for yourself. You're actually making the best case you can, but you're not necessarily saying you're sorry if you're being Greek. Okay. So Dr. John Lennox is a pure mathematician, and he was discussing in these cases, where was I going with this? Dear me. This was very important, of course.
It's okay. Don't sweat it now, Claire. We got a question in the chat that that I don't want to miss. It was Harrison pointed out that the Beatles used to have circle jerks, and we were still kind of in that realm. Have you ever heard of that
Right.
before?
Well, yes, and in fact, Sir Paul, who recently came out and said that they did that, he wasn't unique in saying things like that. He wasn't there for that original. I mean, I don't know when George Harrison was saying that they had done that. John Lennon said that it was like the Satyricon, which is a Latin text of trying to justify morality, but telling all the bad stuff. So a lot of people think that it's actually glorifying the bad stuff, but it wasn't. It was actually to say, you shouldn't be doing this, but it gets really juicy. There's all kinds of orgiastic and other behaviors that are discussed in the Satyricon, and then they moralize on it. So this was obvious that they were exposed, I believe, to young people, possibly not interested in actual children, although the legal definition of child is anyone under 18 or 16, but young people, that the people who provide such people are also providing actual, what we would call children. I am not saying there isn't cult sacrifice. I'm not saying that there isn't evidence, marvelous evidence for that is awful. What I'm saying, though, is I think that the Beatles were exposed to that which would suit them, and that, that it wasn't an innocent time, but I do think that it was more innocent to, they were learning about this, kind of a little bit like, ugh, like they would have heard of certain things or known of certain things, but they wouldn't have taken that much interest until later. I think what
they were
happened
young,
was when Paul died, John, in his absolute grief, and you can watch this in the way he responds and the kinds of anger he expresses about working for the man or the crew-cutted guys that come in and really run the show. Okay, you can actually find those comments. I think he realized maybe there's a hell of a lot more going on here. So I think there was an innocent lost.
Sorry to interrupt, but was the death an accident in your mind?
Good question.
For PR reasons, I prefer not to answer that. I used to say so, and I will definitely say, and you can read into this what you will, that it is an excellent argument. But in order to promote the fact that this could ever be acknowledged, it's very important that researchers, and so what we call researchers, like everybody's a researcher, not everybody's a researcher, but anyway, we're going to call them students of the case, to realize that if they keep talking about some of these things as certain, there will be absolutely no way to get a public acknowledgement of this case. Because anyone who could be legally in trouble is going to be extra afraid of that form of reprisal. So what I will say is the argument for the death as a murder is excellent. And it surrounds several different issues. One is, what did the Beatles know? It wasn't an innocent time, but I do believe they were in some sense innocent, not sexually innocent, but but what would be a key event? This is what I find missing from I'm going to call him my colleague Mike Williams and others. And what I find missing is an appreciation of a necessary cause. Okay, there's one thing that is to say it's like a sufficient cause. All of this stuff would be sufficient to kill Paul. Right? All of it. I mean, anything, and people have died for less than this. But what specifically could he have done that would have gotten him killed? Okay, we could say, well, he was just a sacrifice. He was one of 5 Pauls, according to the memoirs book. Okay, and they were all equally good.
I didn't
Bill
know
was
that.
the best.
So hold on, the memoirs book says there was 5 different I've never read it. Like I said, I considered
I
buying
think
it.
the new edition there was a bunch of them hanging in the wings. Or Mike Williams is taking that because the story is that Bill was there always. Or it's some version where it allows for how many people were dropping in. And Mike Williams's position is that they found the most excellent double ever for the award ceremony just before Paul died, but it wasn't Paul. Okay, so he's pardon this, really confusing the issue. That does not mean on every point, but on this issue.
Right.
So going back to the multiples, and it comes from the idea that you put a photographic comparison up, and you say, there's nothing wrong here. That's the typical PIA position. Nothing wrong here. It's a bunch of different lenses and some different hair and different lighting, and he's different, okay? He looks different and really strikes you as different. There are other people who say, my gosh, something is wrong here, and then they say almost every photo I've looked at is a new Paul. I mean, it gets to this, at what point do you stop, and can you make any decision? How many people were playing in and out? Is this a normal thing, or is it a singularity? Okay? Now, science deals with singularities all the time. Actually, people who argue from the idea that, everything just goes along and there's no singularities, and it's wrong. Actually, the beginnings of the universe is supposed to be singularity. I mean, every new molecule is actually a singularity, even though it has a commonality. I mean, you see, so there's singularities in mathematics and in cosmology quite a lot. So what would be sufficient to kill him? This was our question, right? And of course, you can say any one of these things would be sufficient. What would be necessary? Okay, because my attitude to conspiratorial subjects, controversies, and official history is that most of the time when someone is killed, unless they get unlucky and they, the friend didn't, was no longer a friend, and kind of they got in the wrong person's sights. And so the environment was all there, and people had guns, and somebody sent out somebody to kill them. I think what most of it is for killing, and again, aside from organized satanic sacrifice, if that occurs, and I do believe it does. Okay, so aside from those two things, what would get him killed? It would have to be a necessary action, because not everyone would want him killed. Just think about it. Instead of this idea of Tavistock is everywhere, Freemasons are everywhere, everybody's in on everything, everybody has a say, everybody's culty. Actually, no. There's a lot of spies and so on, and prime ministers, and even if they do certain things that are, let's say, illegal, they're not in on all of it. They're not for all of it, and they have to apologize to the public. And there's all of that too going on. So I think that for everybody to sign off on a death, if it was a murder, to be judicious about it, something had to occur to make everyone involved want to murder him. And I do.
I'm sorry to interrupt again, but was this right before the Revolver album?
I believe that the impetus is visible right before the Revolver album. And what it is that we now know the now deceased Mark Lane, who was the main lawyer and promoter of the Dallas Witnesses, Dealey Plaza Witnesses, took it as a legal case, was speaking about the Kennedy assassination, wrote an awesome early book called Rush to Judgment, which my mother read, as I said. That book had come out in '66 in the summer, but Paul is now reported as having read that the previous winter, just before '66. So in late '65, Mark Lane is out peddling his manuscript, not to make it sound sleazy or shady or
no, that's what we do. We peddle our wares. That's what we're doing right here.
I'm using it as a just he's out there peddling it. And Paul, according to his biography, Paul read the copy. And Paul, according to Mark Lane, called him. Now, I heard Mark Lane interviewed, and I know that he was embroiled in some other big conspiracies. I think he didn't know the full extent of those conspiracies and was what is called sheep-dipped. I believe that he was, he had so many powerful friends that some people didn't want to kill him, but they made him look bad through the Jonestown massacre issue.
So now this is the author. You got to define sheep dipped for us, because I don't think I know that term. Go ahead and tell us what that means.
That's a spy term where you it's almost like a doubling or replacement. What you do is you take a person and you present them as being someone else or having a different character, I mean personal moral character. You place them into a group to spy or interact or even help, but also wreck a group, but they don't know your real allegiance. Okay, so you can be dressed up as a new person, but you can also be, pretending to be, let's say, a supporter of Bernie Sanders, but you're actually a British spy.
Yep, I got you. Thank you. I just I must not have heard that, but obviously we see a lot of this with COINTELPRO, etc.
Yes, exactly, and that's where the terms come, and it is an official thing that's done. I mean, it's not. It's so. What I believe about Paul is that Mark Lane is that yes, he knew too much. Yes, he was involved in Jonestown. Yes, the West Guyanese coroner said they were shot. Yes, it wasn't a regular cult. Yes, it was a CIA operation. Yes, the bodies were increasingly found behind the little shed, and suddenly there's 500 dead back there. I mean, it cannot be what it was claimed to be. But I believe that as a lawyer, defender of that, Mark Lane was not fully in the know, and he was down there and he was protected and he was carried out. So there were people who impugned Mark Lane on the Kennedy assassination based on the idea that he was actually a spy op and he was into the Jonestown massacre. I find that problematic because I have dealt so in depth with Mark Lane and his, if you will, almost just stomach felt dedication and efforts and flack he took and so on, and his manner. I mean, he didn't have to do even half of what he did for the Kennedy assassination if he hadn't been serious. So
Tracy, were you going to say something? I don't want to get too far away from you. She started to pop in there, so.
So to recap, so Mark Lane had written a book about JFK that Paul read right before he perhaps died. Is that right?
Actually, yes, and I was just about to get back to it. So what actually happened, according to Mark Lane's autobiography, but I had to justify Mark Lane. You see, this is the problem. You have to almost, do a hyperlink and go down in there and read the article on that and then come back, in order to understand these arguments. Paul, according to Mark Lane's autobiography, very clever title, Citizen Lane, very cute, a few years ago claimed that in November, early December, when he was in London, Paul McCartney of the Beatles had read his manuscript, called him up, and when he was back in Washington, and he said, "Sorry, who are you?" And I've heard him talk about this, and he's very genuine about it. He says, "I had no ear for music." He said, "I wasn't even into music. I think he was more of an emotional intellectual than a musical intellectual." And he said, "Yeah, this is Paul McCartney." So he couldn't have done it, could he? And he's like, "Who? Sorry, he's many cases." And he says, "Well, Oswald, I mean, he actually couldn't have done it." This is the issue. Could Oswald have actually done it or not? Paul was deciding he actually couldn't have. And at that point, Mark Lane said, "Oh, yes, and where did you say you're from?" "Paul McCartney, Beatles, them, oh, yes, I've heard, oh, yeah, And that shows how out of touch he was with, just general pop culture. They weren't first on his mind. He was older,
Well,
too.
And it wouldn't have been it's not like it is today where pop culture is just everywhere all the time. The degree that you would get a signal from any kind of media was less. You either tune into the radio stations. There's not very many. You tune in or you don't. You watch television.
Yes,
there's not very many
let's
channels.
Be honest, Mark Lane had heard of the Beatles. He knew what they were.
Right.
So he certainly, the Beatles were everywhere. But it was not the first thing on his mind as he went from case to case. And he was investigating the Oswald case, and so he's not in that mode. And I think that's what caught him off guard. So they had supposedly a several-hour conversation, and within a month, Paul has what is called a moped accident with his good friend, multimillionaire heir and socialite and youngest member of the House of Lords, young nobleman, Tara Brown. They are both supposedly out on mopeds. They supposedly, at fairly high speeds on the mopeds, didn't have much damage. And yet, then you have a gap. And a few months later, we have photos of him and videographic evidence of him with a chipped tooth. Reports that he refused to fix the tooth. And I
Who
see
has
there,
the broken tooth? Paul, right?
Paul, I'm sorry, it's Paul. Paul had
And,
that.
and Tara, is Tara dead yet?
No, Tara died at the end of the year on the very day that Sir Paul made his London debut.
Okay.
Okay, so
Right.
Tara dies. We'll get to that. So Paul is in December of '65. He's met Mark Lane, and within weeks, if that, he meets an accident with his friend, and they were good friends. And this accident is not. We have no photos of Tara. We do have a photo of Paul with injuries. Now the question.
So you have no photos of Tara with injuries?
No, not at the time that I know of, but we don't have many photos of Tara either. I mean, he was, he wasn't as photographed as Paul. I mean, let's put it bluntly.
But there's photos of him not injured. Just there aren't photos of him injured.
Yeah, there aren't photos of him injured, and there's only one photo of Paul injured, and some people think it's Bill the Replacement or Sir Paul. I tend to think it actually is Paul, but in a very long-faced angle. And what you see is some lip damage, a black eye, and if the injuries were like that, and they obviously have to have been somewhat like that because he isn't so horribly damaged that he's out for months with no photos, when we see him emerge in videographic evidence in early to mid 66, he has a broken tooth, he has kind of a little swollen mouth, and he does not look so happy. And what I think happened was he was wearing that as a badge of I dare you. Like I'm not afraid of you. The problem is, as I say to people, if you're messing with these mobsters, and they don't have to be formal mobsters of the Italian kind, they can be any kind of, conspirators, you're never safe. So you can wear that tooth and say, ha, I'm daring to show it, and you're never safe until the damn thing is exposed formally. So Paul then that summer has bought a new home in London, Cavendish Avenue. He moves in with his very young dog, Martha, a little puppy at the time. And the end of this regarding the injuries is that Mark Lane comes to London and meets John Lennon, Paul McCartney, while he's there. His book has now come out. It's The Time of Revolver, August 1966, or just before that, actually. And he says, they played for me Eleanor Rigby on the piano. They said, we've just composed this. We'd like you to hear it. And he says, so the irony is I, who had a tin ear, am the first one to hear a song that became so famous later. So Paul was maintaining a relationship per Mark Lane. He's maintaining a relationship with Mark Lane. And he supposedly offered to do the movie. The movie was coming out in 1967. Now, it is available on Vimeo and YouTube, I believe, but they say 1966. The movie did not come out in 66. It was copyrighted in 66. It actually came out in 67. It came out in black and white with bad titles. It had the Dallas Witnesses. Now, hearing people in their own words shows that they're probably not crazy. They're normal people. They're afraid. They're saying, in other words, they can't be smeared as well, and it gives legal arguments and conspiratorial, logic arguments. But Paul had offered to write the film score and back the film. Now imagine that would have come out in color. It would have come out in 100 million theaters or whatever. It would have come out with people just going to see this thing that, even
just
in its
because of Paul McCartney.
Like Paul,
So
it also would have opened up discussions. Families would have had discussions on whether the Dallas Witness, and then they would have been moved by the movie itself. So, that is a necessary cause, if I ever saw one.
So, Tracy, you were familiar with all of this?
I'm not familiar with all this, but it's amazing how it fits in with all the stuff we've presented in the past that I've written about over the last few months, connecting the Beatles,
Frank Sinatra, Walt Disney,
the mafia people that killed JFK, and there's lots of cross connections with people suspected of being involved in RFK's murder, and the Beatles and the Charles Manson cult too. So we have all these connections.
Yeah, the actual. Sorry.
I'm just saying we've talked
about
this.
What you're bringing up or tying together
connections recently.
It ties together a huge string of past shows, and especially Tracy's Tracy's research that's behind her paywall is she has a specialty plus ultra membership part of her website. And so she gets into really detailed, long, super deep dive, as they call it now, research. The reason I interrupted was because of that, and it sounds to me like I don't think I've ever heard the theory. It sounds like some people postulate, and I know you don't want to take an absolute position, that maybe Paul McCartney, a justification or a reason for his death would have been that he was jumping on the bandwagon of JFK conspiracy work, up to and including being willing to write the film score and back the movie, which would have pushed it completely harder into the limelight just because Paul's name's on it. So that's I had never heard of that until just now, and of course it's firing my synapses that I mean, you'd have to go back if you're bored and you want to have some fun on a rabbit hole you've probably not been down. Pay the $10 a month and jump in Tracy's paid side, or to just go back to our old episodes about Frank Sinatra and stuff, and I'm sure there's lots of things that would correlate to your work, Claire.
Well, yeah, and look, let me give credit to Tina Foster, a.k.a. Cynthia Hodges' lawyer, who first brought this to public attention about the Mark Lane quotation. It was on her blog site, and much as I disagree with some of her conclusions about the timing of the death, and some people might say that doesn't actually matter, what it matters for is being able to recognize photos of Paul, because if he's actually replaced earlier by her than he really was replaced, I think, then you're actually confusing photos of them. But anyway, other than that, Tina brought this out, and I spoke about it many times, and many people have. But what's important is, I do not say that there is no Satanism, pedophilia. No, here I'm going to go out on a limb, because usually I don't go into this, and I don't go into it for a very good reason, because it actually is so big to prove that stuff of an evening that those who are not yet ready for it can turn off a specific case when someone says, yeah, you know, you got 200 million more to look into. So what I will say is each case has to be handled, but if you do know that those things are going on, and a good introduction might be, well, maybe Tracy's work, which I haven't seen, but also David McGowan's work, and so on. If you get that stuff, then you move back to this stuff, and what I find is a problem with someone like, and I did an interview with Mike Williams, so I'm certainly not against Mike Williams, but let me say, what I find is a problem, and we vigorously disagree, is that this generalized bad stuff, and it's not generalized that there aren't cases, but for any specific case, it's a generalized background knowledge, determines the case. I think we have to know that though there are creepazoids, real awful creepazoids, some of them, doing things at levels of amounts that some people have no wish to know about, I believe that that we also have to keep in mind that a very specific action was taken. Like, is it only sacrifice? Is it only the knowledge of the general bad stuff? Or was there something that would cohere? You see, not all bad people are created equally. Not all people who do a bad thing even are bad before they do the bad thing. So you would have to cohere people who otherwise would not gather, like they would not want to lose the cash cow. And I did make this point on Mike's show. The Beatles were huger than ABBA was for Sweden. So for Sweden, as a context, ABBA was huger than Volvo, and Volvo is bigger than cars. The Beatles were the reason that the then Prime Minister could float the British pound for 4 years. 4 years! Now, they didn't see that kind of riches. But the economic activity and the productivity and the belovedness and all of that is playing a role. Not everyone would want Paul dead. Not everyone would want a risk like that, even if they were brought into the secret meetings. How would you convince them? Well, Kennedy, you begin to get everybody seeing that the Kennedy witnesses are normal, right, and good, and you've got good lawyerly arguments, and it's making a personal appeal as if you're in a court. Okay, he has to die. Now, was it a sacrificial death? Yes, maybe. I believe that Kennedy, or Jack Kennedy, not so much Bobby, Jack Kennedy was also a sacrificial target. It was set up in the first location, the Triangle Park, of the very first Freemasonic lodge in, that's what the park is for, actually. It's the location where they had their first Freemasonic lodge. And so on and so on. And actually, there's a lot about that with Kennedy, but he was also killed for very specific reasons. So you see, we cannot go so hairy, woolly-brained as to think, well, there's all these bad people running around, and I know about all these cases, and everything's all involved, because it is involved. But there are very often specific reasons that make a singularity actually occur.
Right. So in this case, the financial repercussion or impact on the British pound.
No, the exposure of JFK. So what stands against it is the financial and the social belovedness of the Beatles, right? So that's a huge thing to put against. Well, we really want this band member dead, but we could just discredit him, or we could find a way to block the movie. There has to be no way that he can do this. So in a way, Paul McCartney is the first John Lennon. And this is a major important point, and I actually love John very, very much. Okay? But what I'm saying about Paul McCartney is people don't realize what a mover, shaker, radical little awareness, conspiracy theorist, explanation person that he was.
Claire, I gotta interrupt you for just a second. I'm sorry to hold that thought.
Okay.
Chat, I want to see in the Discord after this episode, I want to see some memes with Claire that says Paul McCartney is the first John Lennon, because that is great. That is brilliant.
Thank you.
Because that's deep.
I've had years to think up these things, and of course they actually are deeply emotional, and I'm not trying to rob John of anything that he did. What I'm trying to say is that people do not realize the power of this young Paul as a person. He's gotten bubble-gummed out of existence. He's gotten 50s out of existence. He's gotten cute little Songbirded out of existence. He actually got the best marks in school. He was an incredible draftsman artist. He was extremely gentlemanly. He was very fun. He also had a nice manner, and he was very engaged and engaging, but he also liked to tell people, enough, hey, everybody, enough. So he didn't have no mettle, and he was the one who called up Mark Lane. If we take Mark, now we can do the if we take Mark Lane's statement, but I think it's so well developed that it's real. And he got beaten up for it, probably with his lordly friend, is what I think happened. And now in the anthology series of the Beatles, which was put out in the 1990s as a kind of
that's with Free as a Bird, right? Free as a Bird was the big song off of that anthology.
Big song, and also Real Love, both of them originally John Lennon's songs. The anthology has a book, it has videos, it has CDs, it has clues on the albums, and so which we were going to get to. I'm so sorry, but I think this is very important what we're talking about. And the anthology has actually claimed that the moped accident happened at the time of Paul's death. So what they've done is, again, conflated a time period so that it's even harder for people, he had a moped accident. No, he didn't have the moped accident. If it was a moped accident, he didn't have it in September 66. He had it back in December 65. Okay, and Sir Paul McCartney, and this is in Tina Foster's wonderful new book. I'm going to plug her book. I make no money off it at all. I make no money off any of this. But despite some errors I feel she's made, and some are egregious errors, I knew some of them that she would make, but some of them are a little bit uncareful. She has written an absolutely wonderful compendium. If you know how to judge certain things. She's written a wonderful compendium of a lot of evidence for PID, and also organized it very well. Okay, now I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying it's wonderful.
So what was the title of the book?
The title of the book is Plastic Maca, because Maca is used for McCartney, and it also means an overcoat, so plastic.
Right, like a
plastic persona, and also plastic McCartney. So Plastic Maca, the death and replacement.
Call him Maca?
They call Sir Paul Maca. Now there is one little. There is one little that's in Britain mostly.
That's huge. You have to give us a second, Claire. That's huge. Because the big part of what we were talking about before, what I would call synchronicities here, when we were marveling a little bit earlier here in the show, I'd say the biggest thing that ties it all together is Mac the Knife. Tracy's work on Mickey Mouse, Mac the Knife, Mackie Messer, Frank Sinatra, the Hawaii Five-O theme, all this stuff ties together. All the linchpin is the character Mackie Messer is Mac the Knife. So the idea that Paul McCartney also is called Macca is a nickname because true British or true Beatles fans know that a banker never wears a Mac in the pouring rain. Everybody knows that means a raincoat. So that's interesting. That's
yes. Well, I mean, again, I don't know exactly what you're getting at there.
No, I know. I don't expect you to, but the audience will.
I literally will not comment except to say not all connections are exactly right. But that's just so that I can maintain a certain amount of distance. But I actually love the song Mac the Knife. Pardon me. I think it's really
Oh no,
sweet.
we don't have any problem with the song.
I know some of what you're getting at. One way or the other, he's called Macca, and her book is called Plastic Macca: The Secret Death and Replacement of Paul McCartney. There is also another book by Nick Kollerstrom, which is much more of an overview, and it's a little bit disjointed, but it does a very nice job, in some of the basics and a kind of a sense of the case. And it's called A Very English Mystery. It's Paul McCartney, the death and replacement of Paul McCartney in 1942 and 1966, or something like that. Okay. Now. And that's actually dedicated to me, although we fell out. So that's a good, I was like, well, thank you. So, there are disagreements among some of the people at the top. But the point I was going to make is from late 1965 through The Broken Tooth and the photo by Mike McCartney that some people think is Bill the replacement, but I think is just a certain angle on the face, that there's a certain angle on everyone's face where it looks flatter. And I think that that's what's confusing people. The injuries do not seem to be enough that you would have from a moped accident at 40 miles an hour, although some people get lucky and walk away. Sir Paul has claimed that he was actually the replacement, but his claim is he was there looking at the moon. It was so distracting, full moon, and oops, except that it was actually near the dark of the moon. Okay, so there's a lot of statements, and that's in Tina's book, so I can actually mention that. I actually knew that, of course.
So Sir Paul blames it on the full moon, but the moon wasn't full? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Sir Paul does a lot of storytelling, and she actually does an excellent chapter and other parts of chapters where she discusses errors he's made, but also, consistent, serious errors that you could not get wrong. They're things that you either remember or you don't. They were major events. And you could say he's joking, except that there's enough of it going on that, again, every form of evidence is important. Not every form of evidence is sufficient. There is a difference. And we're talking about forms of evidence. Some of them have that 30% likelihood, but it has that 30% likelihood, so it goes into the pile. And that is a very important thing to remember, is that even if you have 1% likelihood on an individual item, if in combination with other things it gains a 99% likelihood, and that's still not 100 because nothing is a mathematical proof in this, if you have those combinations and recombinations, and this might be a nice place to talk about the clues, if you have that combination and recombination aspect, then that's even more unlikely. You see, so it's not just a pile of things and the amount that counts, it's the types of things, and then it's their interactions. Again, it's that bivalent reasoning, right? What do we call it? The biduction, right?
Right. I said transduction. Because...
you said transduction, but I want to be careful that some people don't think some people present us as though we are being supernatural. We're almost so out the realm that we are bringing in an almost divine, except evil, event into everybody's normal lives. And this just didn't happen, okay? But in fact, Paul was not resurrected. I'm not going to pronounce on whether Jesus was. Paul was not resurrected. And the way that this has been covered up is that there was no event. It's not supposed to have happened at all, unlike 9/11 or Kennedy or Bobby Kennedy or Martin Luther King or any other thing in history. This one supposedly didn't exist at all. So when it is referred to, it's referred to as a cloning, a twinning, a brothering, so that it sounds like it's the same guy. I do not believe that it is a cloning, a twinning, or a doubling. The guy looks very different, and he really is older, and so on. There's also, of course, the fact that it's not just not a cloning, twinning, or doubling. It's also not a resurrection. And I'd like to make a point, something that I discovered. Jude, which is famous for the Hey Jude song, right?
Yeah.
It has been that idea has been poured over by scholars for a long time, and they're not really convinced it's Jules for Julian, the son of John Lennon, and they've come up with all kinds of things that do not fit all verses. The one thing that fits all verses is PID. Because there is a verse where Sir Paul sings, if you're out there alone, you're singing alone, and they might not love you, that kind of thing. Okay, that's very much a stage fright thing. So how would that relate to, yeah, there's some love in there. Okay, I don't think that's as important. There may have even started with, Jules is kind of sad. I don't know. Okay, but Saint Jude is the patron saint of hopeless cases, number one. Saint Jude and Saint Christopher, whether you're Catholic or not, I mean, there's lots of people who are not Catholic who have those little medallions in their kind of St. Jude and St. Christopher. St. Jude's Hospital, St. Jude's Charity, St. Jude, the hopeless cases. Okay. But
he's very, very popular amongst celebrities because of Danny Thomas, so they all would have heard of him.
Well, there you go. And I mean, he's actually very well known, of course, in Britain. I mean, anyone who knows a bit about Christianity knows about St. Jude. So this is an immediate association. And of course, he's talking about hopelessness. But does it go beyond that? And in fact, what I decided to do with my medieval background, I decided to say, well, is there anything about St. Jude? I mean, the person that may be being referred to. How about his iconography? Well, it turns out his iconography is about the first icon. It is about, and the original icon was the shroud.
Yep.
The original icon was supposed to be a magical painting or something that was maybe sweat, but they didn't know how it had happened. Now, I don't know, I'm not going to pronounce whether it's authentic. What I'm going to say is, though, for the iconography, St. Jude always wears, well, there's the odd icon, there's the odd image of him that does it. He just has his club, that he was clubbed for with martyrdom. Okay, but and saints do tend to have that. Like if their eyeballs were plucked out, they'll be holding them on a platter, but they'll also have them. It's a kind of a storytelling in images.
Yeah.
But sometimes, most of the time, he's pictured with a big medallion of Jesus on his chest or in front of him, and it was not supposed to be just a medallion. It was supposed to be the original face of Christ in the shroud. Now, if you think of this, how more PID can you get? So
he's the twin too.
St. Jude?
He's like the medallion that he's holding is like, it looks like a picture of Jesus. So it's like he's holding a picture of, and he himself looks very much like Jesus. And he has
the artist, the Jude wasn't supposed to have been Jesus's twin, but when they do their art, they often.
There's Judas Thomas, right?
Well, actually, if we get into the actual questions, there's questions of which Jude it was, but the point is this sort of idea of St. Jude has an icon, and the icon is the icon. Icon means true image. And the true image of someone more saintly who is dead is being carried by his saintly, oh, we're so grateful, thank you so much, Sir Paul Bill, his saintly messenger who is lesser than but carries the face of. Now, this is absolutely PID in its application. All right, there's so many aspects of this. I mean, it's not simply one thing. Sir Paul is basically the pall bearer, and in a way the dead man bearer, pall bearer, and in a way the true face, because we think he has the true face of the saintlier man, because Paul is usually presented as saintlier than Bill. And I like to say to people like Mike Williams, who says, we all just adore Paul, and he's so perfect, and he's the saint. What I'm saying is that Sir Paul is making this imagistic claim that there's the saintly guy, the guy he's got to imitate. I mean, greater than me, he's got all the money, he's got all the fame, and I step into it. But in a way, I'm saintly too. Isn't that nice? Okay, now I see evil in that. But I'm pointing out the iconography. And there's another issue about iconography here, too. It is the Freemasonic and occultic interest in the Egyptians, about whom I know quite a bit. I actually know quite a bit about a lot of things, so pardon me on that. But one of the things is that occultists, not just the dark occult, like the negative occult, but the occultists are very interested in ancient Egypt. And until 1820, Egyptian hieroglyphs had not been translated. And to this day, there are debates about what exactly they mean and whether there was a catastrophe 9,000 years before they told Solon, the lawgiver of Athens, and he told Plato, and there was a kind of an Atlantis, or there was a worldwide... Okay, there's all these issues around Egypt and other ancient societies with these ancient time scales and a catastrophe way back. So if we're talking about...
Right.
Ancient Egypt and occultists, they are very interested in these sorts of questions. Plus your personal development, your personal transformation, transfiguration,
Hermeticism.
Even. Pardon?
It's the roots of Hermeticism, yeah.
Yes, Hermeticism, and that's one version of, yeah. So just for people who do not know what I mean by occultism, it's not all bad, and
our audience knows I'm sure we'll get a few rare people that aren't part of our regular audience, but this is the bread and butter of our stuff, what you're talking about here. So.
Right, but we don't know. This will go out, and it will go out to way more than. So, I mean, I'm giving this background. I think it's always important to, if you have the time, to give some of the background. So ancient Egypt as a mystery to the people who were in the mystery cults later, because they didn't know much about ancient Egypt. Right? Plus, ancient Egypt as a potential mystery cult itself. There's two issues, right? The later people not knowing much and believing it was all mysterious, maybe having a tradition from earlier. And then what we know now about the Egyptians themselves, there's a mystery cult aspect to this stuff. And some of it was ugly and some of it was beautiful. Okay, so Sir Paul is very interested in Egypt. Now, this comes through in the winged beetle, the idea of wings... The Winged Beetle movie from phony I mentioned earlier. And then there's Wings, which of course was his, Sir Paul's band in the 70s. But he also uses a lot of occult imagery. And this is after Paul dies. Now, before Paul dies, they certainly are presented as like the sun, the moon, and the stars. But I don't see that as absolutely sinister, because they were being promoted, and we always say you're a star or whatever. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't occultists around them, or they weren't interested in a Ouija board, which I do not think is that weird for children of the time. But I do believe that after Paul died, there was a rise in the cultic aspect in their lives. And one of the reasons would be, and this is in the Memoirs book. The Memoirs book is putatively at arm's length by the replacement, and I believe it is. And there are two versions, two editions, and the second one is god-awful. The first one is actually is pretty straightforward. They both basically write Paul out of his own story, and they tout Bill as much better every chance they get. The book itself is published by Pepper's Press, which is also P&P, a double P. You get again now these kinds of images. Maca Corporation. Now, if this were really so, Sir Paul would probably sue out of existence or stop any such book. Okay? If it were not his own at arm's length. That is one good argument that it is by Bill at arm's length. But also the kinds of things it skips over, the kinds of things it twists compared to regular research that Mike Williams unfortunately considers, because it's his main, he's an expert on memoirs. He's not an expert on PID. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
right?
That makes sense. Because I'm glad you came back to this, Claire, because this is kind of, I want to recap for the audience. When we first started, we were talking about taking at least some of the show and focusing on what I call paralleling of stories. They call it a limited hangout. They call it damage control. And so now this is the second occurrence in this episode in our discussion tonight where you've brought up what looks like very good opportunity to demonstrate a chance of damage control. So the movie... remind me the movie title again, please.
The Winged Beetle.
No, I'm talking about the first movie you mentioned. I'm sorry. The fakes where I'm a fake. It was like I'm trying to remember.
I Am a Phony is the group.
Right. So I Am a Phony was
the Winged Beetle, and before that, the Rotten Apple series.
Okay, yeah. So there, I didn't realize that the I Am a Phony was the group. So the Winged Beetle movie also sounded like a limited hangout, damage control, paralleling or managing of the information to come out. And then also the Billy Shear's memoir, Paul is Dead book, So this might even be the same group. And like you said, you're using the video editing skills it takes to put together beautiful production is just it's crazy. Most of us have done it. It's really takes a lot of work to put together a really high quality production. It takes hours and hours. If you're gonna have to write songs behind it, etc. So I just wanted to if you're gonna continue to talk about casting at least a little bit of doubt or skepticism on the memoirs book. And like you said, Mike Williams is an expert on the memoirs book. I've listened to at least 6 or 7 of his hours of his interviews about all this stuff, and that's why I almost bought the book, because I was like, oh look, Paul is dead. I haven't thought about this since I was a kid. So go ahead and give us at least your perspective on.
Right.
It sounds like to me there's damage control going on.
My position isn't that okay, let me back up. Disinformation or misinformation can be an aspect of an attempt actually to get the truth out. Let's not forget that. If something is so high quality that obviously the people behind it actually really want to get the truth out, then I don't call it disinformational. The fact that they don't dare go the last step, well, I guess technically speaking, yes, that's disinformational. I'm angry at them for not doing that. But I understand it. But I believe the I am a phony material is so, it's so, let me swear, so goddamn excellent in so many ways that I think it actually is, as far as insiders will go, it is a revelation. Okay, I will stand by that. Now, that does not mean that certain images were not taken out of context and it's only done when there's nothing else available. And I know that as an artist. I know sometimes you have to well, this is what I got,
Oh yeah,
the impression.
yeah. We all do that as artists.
I also feel that, and the reason I will say that instead of harping on that and proposing a whole new theory from that one aspect, and a few broadcasts that they compiled that are historical broadcasts. They were from 1969 when the rumor hit. I believe it was actually spread deliberately in 1969 in the USA, and it had already been going since 1966. And people should know now, if they don't already know, that it was in print by 1967 in February. The rumor itself was in print.
Please address why the rumor is being spread in the first place. Why are there clues?
Well, I would think it's what we all probably would assume, that these people kind of, sort of, really, sort of, kind of, on a good day, before they've had 10 drinks, want it out. This is an unusual case that most people involved in the cover-up didn't want to be involved in the cover-up. That is unusual.
They're not teasing us. They're not rubbing our faces in it. They actually were hoping.
I don't believe the Beatles were in '69. I think they were almost testing the powers that be around them that they now had become part of. I don't believe that. Now there's a different scenario. So back to I'm a phony. The I'm a phony materials are so excellent, and not only the editing. I hope that's water there. No, I'm kidding.
We're in the third hour here.
Is it water or beer? No, I'm kidding. I won't make you answer that. So the issue is that the I'm a Phony group is not merely producing excellent visual materials. They have gone and found clue evidence, okay? I mean, statements made in broadcasts all over the web, little things that were said and done, and compiled them and brought in the Manson issue, brought in the issue of, is there a bigger issue around what's going on in the world, and were some of those maybe part of that killing or accidental death or cover-up? I mean, so they don't say that, but they're implying it by a melee, mosaic. I did medieval studies. It's a mosaic. So I'll choose mosaic for today. So anyway, so they're compiling all this stuff, and inside it are certain pieces that are stunning. I mean, okay, not technically absolute proof that you would ask for at the beginning, but they are. I I mean, they are stunning stuff. And I think that shows that the attempt was made by the Neil Aspinall group, if that money trail is valid, that Ringo and Neil Aspinall and others were involved in trying to get the truth out without being burned. And that when Neil Aspinall died of cancer and may be dead by induced cancer, when that occurred, it was further taken over or influenced by Bill the replacement. This makes sense because although it makes Bill look bad, it also almost lauds or almost presents some of this satanic material intriguingly. Okay, it's actually very sad, but it brings it up. Now, Mike Williams is going by instead this other book, that came out in 2009 and then came out in this year. And the book itself is a very complex and yet simple twisting of the case. But what I mean by that is anything you could know without it is twisted. And in other words, so as if it's some kind of insider knowledge and it wasn't true. Everything you learned before about anything is not true. The other thing it does is it interjects things like the Satanism and the cultic behavior and the term Illuminati, which of course some people will not be interested in a broadcast like this if I use the term, but it's in the book. And Mike Williams is now touting himself as really bringing the Illuminism issue and the Freemasonic issue and the occulty issue and even the other bigger satanic issue into the world of PID. I think what has happened is he has been talking to mostly ignorant newbie PIDers who never considered that. But of course, it's already an I'm a phony when I started. And it also is logical at the beginning to say, even if Paul died by accident, this was my original position, if Paul did die, he died by accident, he was replaced, which I can see. I can see that, and I've worked it out, and I've worked at the photos. If he died by accident, well, it can't be just the Beatles. Now, my best friend who's 70 said to herself, well, I don't know how it was done. And when she started hearing about the JFK issue or the fact spies were involved, it actually hadn't occurred to her, but she's not a student of conspiracy. If you are, you know that the only people who would be giving false passports and making legal arrangements, it wouldn't be an inside job of the Beatles, it would be an inside job of what we could call intelligence, culty, behavior, bad guys, or cover-up artists.
The cloak and dagger
folks. So already
folks.
you're into that world. You're already into the world that has been revealed by conspiracy studies to have a lot of these bad things. So at that point, when I see culty mentions and lauding of culty stuff in the book, not that creepy, and it's kind of creepy in the book, but it's almost like, well, but love me. Then I say, this is Bill touting himself at arm's length. Let me make my point about the Egyptians. The Egyptian basic myth is, now you can take this as a spiritual thing, you can take it as a physical or an ancient aliens issue, that there was IVF or in vitro fertilization. But the myth says that there was a family, it derived from the sun. The sun is a god or a principle or the ultimate power source we all relate to, and it relates to us. It's an early theism, okay? And it's also, of course, pagan. Anyway, the sun, Ra, had a son, which means that in this sun king, whose name was Osiris, that the spirit of God liveth in him, shall we say, okay? I mean, I'm trying to make it very approachable, so it doesn't just sound weird. Okay, so the son has a son, or shall we say, this man had the inspiration. Okay, so, but in a family sense, his father was the son. Okay, somehow, and he is a sun god, and he brings all of the wonderful law-giving. He's like a Quetzalcoatl or an early post-Diluvian. Post-catastrophe kind of king, and he comes down and he brings all of these wonderful gifts to humanity, and he's killed by his brother and a bunch of conspirators. And this brother, his name is Set. which possibly is related to the word Satan or Satan later. Okay? And in the Lion King movie, of course, that is turned into Scar, another S name of someone who is scarred or who is damaged or who's nasty, like Cain towards Abel. Okay, so in the Hebrew Bible, but in this case, it's God is in them. So the son has two sons. One of them conspires with a bunch of other people to kill the God King, the physical God King, and so the wife of the God King, Isis, loving mother and lover that she was, tries to find the pieces of the body that are cut up and scattered around everywhere. Pretty grisly story, and she manages to find everything except the penis and balls, the phallus. She cannot find it. So what she does is she makes a wooden phallus. Now, an ancient alien's position would say, and does in fact say, that this is a metaphorical emphasis that something unnatural was going on, that it was a very real event, but they didn't understand the event. She was gathering pieces of the body to do something with it, like a Frankenstein. But I'll go back to the myth. So in the myth, she has sex with the wooden phallus and miraculously conceives a child. And that child becomes the new God King. So he is both kind of a grandson of the sun and kind of a kingly replacement and kind of an unnatural birth or unnatural replacement. Now, obviously, these basic myths have many interpretations that have satisfied different Egyptians and people through the ages, depending on what you want to use it for. But I believe that the cultic interest through the Ordo Templo Orientis, which Sir Paul McCartney had written on his diary in 1970, and that is shown in the I Am a Phony movie. These are the kinds of things it's like, okay, how the hell did they have access to that? Okay? So the OTO, and Crowley wasn't all bad, and his Mathers wasn't all bad, but they kind of were. Some of them were more enlightened than others. And so this OTO, or satanic cult, or enlightenment cult, I mean, you could take it either way, is linked to Sir Paul. Now, what do they believe? They believe a lot of this Egyptian stuff, and they do sex magic. They believe in that, which you could see as Kundalini kind of magic, but it also can be extremely nasty stuff. And there is good evidence that there are satanic people killing people. Okay, so if we understand all of that, and it takes a while to understand, then what about this Egyptian myth? Why would Sir Paul be so interested? Is it only OTO? Well, he's used, pardon me, he's used St. Jude, who carries the image of Christ, the literal face of Christ, and Christ is the dead guy. Okay, now why would he emphasize the raw, the Beatles as Beatles? Because of course, John was being cute and clever. Hey, we're going to be the Beatles, and there was the Crickets. But it becomes extremely convenient later. I do not believe it was set up from the beginning. There are people that do. But it becomes very convenient later when Sir Paul and the Crowleyites and the spies and the creepazoids, if I'm right, and if Mike Williams is right and Tina's right, and we all agree on this point, then that becomes the sun god beetle image of the Egyptians. And of course, he just came out with Egypt Station, and he does all of these Egyptological. Okay, so if we're going to deal with it that way, who is Ra, who is Osiris, and who is Horus? Well, of course.
Beatles?
Pardon?
In the Beatles, who can we identify?
Yeah.
Well,
basically.
let Tracy give it a shot here. Hold on, let's see.
No. I'm not going to give it a shot. I want to hear it.
All right, go ahead, Claire.
Well, why don't you? Who was replaced? It was Horus. I'm sorry, who was replaced? It was Osiris. He was killed by conspirators. He had to be replaced.
Obviously, yeah.
Okay, so he had to be replaced unnaturally. Even if you want to see it as a miracle in the original story, it's an unnatural thing.
Okay, so here's my theory then. Okay, to answer your question, Horus is the replacement.
Yes, he would be the replacement. If you're doing a somewhat correlation, okay, now none of this, it wasn't created for Bill to use it, so it has other applications. But if you're just going to do a family genealogy, then Paul's father is it's like the son, or God is like the son in Paul, and some conspirators came and killed him. Not necessarily his brother. I mean, the myth has been around longer than our exact case, so it wouldn't necessarily be. But I mean, just a correspondence. And Paul dies, and he's replaced unnaturally by a man who, in the original myth, is just as wonderful and is a wonderful king, and so on. Right now, what happens in memoirs that Mike Williams misses? What happens in memoirs is Bill, and I do believe one should read it if one is going to be critically accurate. It actually made me dislike Bill even more, but it made Mike Williams love him more for converting him. Okay, but I was already converted, so I did not like this Bill that's in there. I thought, yeah, this is his real character. But what does he say about the Egyptians? He says, Paul is Horus, and I am Ra. So that makes, not only that makes Bill the grandfather in the story, it makes him God. Okay? It makes him the inspirer instead of the inspired. And it makes Paul, who was replaced, not even the dead guy. Like, it's really twisted. Now, you could say that that's just being cute and clever, and it wasn't even by Bill, or it's Bill just twisting it for fun, and you got to work it out and isn't so clever. But I think it also is a hypnotic type of action where you create something so wrong that yeah, you've mentioned Egypt, and now someone comes along like me and goes, hey, who's going to be Horus, and who's going to be Ra, and who's going to be Osiris? Well, the guy who's dead is Osiris. Now, in the Egyptian myth, Osiris is taken up into heaven and becomes the constellation Osiris, Orion, okay? But he's not really alive again in the body. Right. So in other words, there's a dead guy who's raised to life, but isn't raised to life. It's his kid, but it isn't his kid, like in the original story. So I believe
it's not his kid because it's not conceived in a normal way, so it's not even really his child.
Right, but of course the Egyptians were saying it kind of is and isn't. Like they would say that the son of, I mean, they didn't understand. If it was IVF and ancient aliens, which I'm not pronouncing on, but if you do take it literally, then there might be something unnatural done with the mummified body or the dead body, and that's why she's seeking the parts. There are people that take this literally. All right. So whatever it is, pre-culture, ancient aliens, or just a weird myth, the point is
a ritual position. Like if they had done a ritual and this person played that role, then the child that was produced in the sex magic ritual would be the...
Yes, and you could see Rosemary's Baby this way, where it's a man who is the devil, but it's considered to be the devil's child. So did the person get taken over by the devil? And by the way, let me say something about the ancient Greeks. One of the most important aspects about their godhead, now I'm not talking about the god of the gaps, whereas you fill it in with a science, you get smaller and smaller room for this kind of god, like where it's the thunder god, but you eventually learn how thunder is. Okay, that's the god of the gaps. As the gaps close, there's less of a god. Okay, but there is a quality to the Greek stories that was more of a recognition, if you will, of your inner divine nature or spirited quality, even if you don't go supernatural about it, even if you don't say there is a spirit, a ghost, an interdimensional hologram when you die, even if you just take it psychologically, there is some kind of spirit in us, or elan vital, which is what anima or daimon or spirit originally meant. Okay, so the spirit of the gods, in that sense, in the Greek stories, also has a lot of qualities of a person who is so inspired and inspiring that they seem to glow with it, or they seem to have something that you don't quite know what it is. And it's not a scientific thing like I can test the great athlete and find out why they're just so good. Yeah, they might have better muscle twitch and they worked harder at it. But there's also something a little special about a great athlete, right? There's something a little bit like a wrestler that can integrate these moves. So they would say that you have Hercules in you. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. And in that sense of like an inspiring idea, or even a conjured interdimensional hologram homunculus that overflows you. You could say that the devil comes in and makes the baby, or you could say Ra has this king. But one way or the other, Bill isn't Ra, and he isn't even Horus, even Osiris. He's Horus. You see, I'm not saying Horus is bad. What I'm saying is he's definitely derivative, right? In the story, even just biologically, even his miracle birth, he's still derivative. And he wants to claim that he's the originator, the original spirit. And he does a lot in the book and in some of his imagery. We're talking about clues and stuff. And also in his, like the two of us fell into the sun. And the first one said to the second one there, I hope you're having fun. I bet Paul didn't say that to him in a ritual. I bet that if Paul's spirit showed up at any point, even if he had wanted to occasionally jump in to help Bill because he didn't want his name to be too tarnished, I bet that Paul was furious on the other side, if there's another side. So Bill is creating an imagination, an image of himself that it goes so far beyond even just pride in himself that it's megalomaniac. It makes him worse than if he just admitted, even at arm's length, I'm not Beatlemania, Paul, but I have done some wonderful things, and I hope you get to know me. He says those things with a megalomania. I wish you'd know me, but I was not Paul, but Paul was not as great as I am. It's like, okay, at that point, it's like, which are you saying? You're saying you're like the sun god, or to take it out of the Egyptians, you're saying you're God.
So,
You're saying
Sir Paul McCartney is the
principle.
demiurge. That's what we're getting to here. Sir Paul McCartney, the fake Paul, Bill, William is the demiurge of the Beatles. He's the false god. He's the god that thinks he's God, that's forgotten that there's a god above God.
Right, and he's using the Egyptian myth to do this, to demote Paul. And again, Horus was not an emotion in the original image. But in terms of 1, 2, 3, 3 is in time the demotion of 1, 2, 3, right? As such, he's the miraculous birth. He's the miraculous one that comes forward. But on the other hand, he was not even happy with being the third. He wants to be the God itself. I mean, in his imagery in the book. Now, that is not true in I Am a Phony. In I Am a Phony, Bill comes across pretty bad. Not that he has no good features, but it does sort of link him in some way to the Laurel Canyon issues. Okay.
Now, is he the Yellow Submarine then? I mean, is that representing him as the sun?
I believe that the Yellow Submarine, I think the Yellow Submarine could be several things, but I think what it is an attempt to go subconscious and the magic, that getting outside of the norm. And the reason I say that is that when we start the Yellow Submarine movie, which is also a eulogy for Paul, and the old identity.
The Beatles hated that movie, right? That's what I've heard, is that they didn't actually want to even participate in that.
Well, they were pretty fucked up at that point. I'm sorry, I actually just swore. I actually did, and I used to try not to.
We're past 10 p.m., so the language is fine.
No, but I don't want to have that clip out there. But the point is that the Yellow Submarine comes in and is sneaking in the background. I think what it is Ringo is absolutely depressed in Liverpool at the beginning. And at the beginning, it says late of. So in other words, someone has died. And it plays Eleanor Rigby. And there is a gravestone saying number 49. Here lie buried. Now that's a very important clue. Well, now we can talk about clues, because 4 and 9 is Paul and McCartney in numbers of letters. Okay.
Really?
4 and 9.
Yeah,
13.
you need to cover this, because in your interview with Mike Williams, you need to digress on that stuff. Please digress on the numerology, because someone asked, we missed a question that I wanted you to hit, and it applies to this. Someone said Paul's date of death is 11/9. Is that, they asked in relation to the British and American datings and whether or not it's swapped. And that's triggered in my memory you covering that in the interview I listened to. So if you can work that all in there, Claire.
Okay, I've made some, what I will say are original discoveries. And of course, they're contested, so I'm not allowed to say they're discoveries. but I've made some original discoveries. One thing is the St. Jude, not only as the, as I think some people had suggested, is the patron saint of hopeless cases, but the imagery of that. Also, the use of the Horus and Isis as a literal story, how that relates to PID, why that would be so prominent, even among an occultist, why that would be. There's other things I've done. One of the things that I've done is reassess the date of death. So you have some slides there, which we never showed.
Yeah.
Can you find the red slide with the backwards II?
Okay, so we're gonna.
Image.
I didn't set it up so there's any cameras. So when I click this over, all we're gonna see is slides, and all
I
right,
can't.
we forgot to. Yeah, that was we just missed a chunk there because the sound wasn't broadcasting. So go ahead and
Not very much.
yeah. Can you recap that just a little, starting with the.
Sure, and there is an image of the mirrored drum skin picture, so maybe you want to show that. It's kind of a brightly colored image somewhere down in among the slides there.
Yeah, that's
And
the one
then
I'm
I'd
gonna look
Then
for.
I'd like to show the red image with the IIIX, okay? So if you can show the drum skin that's mirrored while I talk about it, that will be good, and then we can move to the IIIX in my red slide. Okay?
Yep, I'm
So
just trying to add.
I'll leave you with finding that. So anyway, what I was saying is that on this album cover, which is filled with clues that have often been misrepresented or put down, and that's one of the ways I started, was to recognize that, well, people are misrepresenting what these people say. People are misrepresenting what PIDers are saying, so at least I should get that straight. And we are broadcasting, right?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So this drum skin, it's supposedly made by a Joe F. Grave, EPHGRAVE, which kind of obviously, if you have any common sense, that's not going to be the guy's name. That's actually epitaphic grave put together. For many years, it was denied that there was a Joe F. Grave, and now one of the makers of the album has spread disinformation claiming, oh, I knew him well, suddenly. Okay, there was no Joe F. Grave. So it's an epitaph grave indicator, and there are many things about this album. This album cover is just wonderful for clues. Most of them are not that hard to make. They're not that hard to conceive originally. Now, this is the difference between an artist and the receiver of the art. The artist works hard at it, has some ideas they cobble together and they try to refine. And then the person who sees them says, wow! Okay, so the album is mind-blowing, but it actually isn't that hard to think of if you're interested in hiding something. So you will try to do something along the lines of a grave site. Yes, the other one, not that one yet. The image of the, it's the image of the actual gravestone somewhere there. If you can.
I don't think I'm quite there yet. I'll just keep going, and when you see it, I'll stop when I think I'm to it.
Okay. I'll just wait. But anyway, when we get to it, if you mirror the middle of it, if you mirror the middle of it, it says, there it is.
Okay, there we go.
That was it.
And let me see if I can make it even bigger here, because we want the main image, right? So let's see. I'll show you what I'd like to do. Let's see. So if I
it doesn't. You can show the whole slide. I mean, it's fine. It's fine.
Is it okay? Because what they're seeing is not what you're seeing. They're seeing only the panel on the right hand side.
Okay. Well, that should be good.
Okay.
I mean, my point is that it says IIIX, he die. That's what it says. And it probably was leaked that is so, because actually, although people say people will go crazy and think anything, and I think that this is happening among some of my colleagues, in general, the clue finding is, I mean, it is these sorts of things. Yeah, it says it. I mean, it's not a matter of who put it there. I mean, it's there. You could say it's coincidence, but it's certainly not something that you're making up seeing or you're making up understanding is there. I mean, I think that's what's happening with Mike Williams. He's actually making up understandings. This is there. Okay, so it says 11IX he died. Now, this was taken for many, many years as 11, which is Roman numerals, and then a switch over to Arabic numerals, and then a switch over to Roman numerals, saying IX. So it's divided. People divided it. They thought, well, that and this was put out very early by a DJ who had what sounds like George Harrison on there, and I think they were leaking it, and it was really early. It was like November 1969. They actually had this broadcast, and they said, well, I guess it was November, November 66. I guess it was November 9th. Because that would be a reading of Arabic with Roman, and it would also be a USA dating. Whereas if you do take it as 11/9, then it's going to be month and day. But most of the world has day and month, and the UK has day and month. So even if you take it as day and month, if you do that, then it's going to be the 9th of September. So in the last few years, this leak, I believe, that was put out. Now, can you go to that red one that was up there earlier?
The very first one I had up.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so it's gonna take a second here for us to get back to it.
That's okay. So the issue is that for many years it was 11/9, and then it was 9 and 11, and then it was reinterpreted. And Tony Barrow said that it was around September 11th or thereabouts that rumors of Paul's death just became wild, and he was the press agent who recently died, and died within 4 days of Mark Lane. So I believe that may also be a fishy set of deaths. I'm trying to skip over who I think is murdered because I don't want to get into more fear-mongering, but I do believe there's a lot. There we go, that one.
Okay.
So the point is that I discovered, because it never fit with the rest of the evidence, so this is what's important. I thought it was maybe 11/9, but John had talked of a Bloody Tuesday in his song, I'm the Walrus. And this has always been seen as PID song, I mean, as long as you were PID. So why a Tuesday? Well, the Tuesday was actually the 13th. And then I began thinking, well, there's this Melody Maker Awards, and Paul is supposed to have been present at the Melody Maker Awards. And we have 2 photographs that put him there, right? And one of them is was doctored by someone who sold a 1965 statue that was given to the Beatles, and they doctored the photo to make a photo of Paul and Ringo and Dusty Springfield and Tom Jones, who were at the event, to make it seem as though these 65 plaques were in a picture, because it didn't have any pictures from 65. Okay, so they were selling a 65 item, and they wanted to make it seem, and they're parallelograms for these. It's not just that it's a bad photoshopping of the images in where it's really implausible, and the way they're holding it, even if you have it holding by the back of the plaque, it doesn't quite work, but also the parallelograms are wrong. So what they did is they took a kind of one of those cheap image illustrators, and they put their image in to try to make it, sell better. The other image, though, has Paul with something under his arm. It's probably a large plaque or an album cover or a gold disc or something. Mm-hmm. And it says way too clearly, September 13th. So the effort was, for the Melody Maker Awards stuff, to keep him alive on the 13th. The 13th is when that event is supposed to happen. The Getty Images has what I think is a partly faked image of Paul holding the 13th. When the magazine came out on the 17th, it said we had our party on the 13th. There's almost no news about the 13th. It's all just kind of superficial fluff about Dusty Springfield and a small interview with Tom Jones. Why the 13th? I think it's the very, very first. I think it's the Tuesday. It was the Bloody Tuesday. I think it's the first day of the cover-up, because that is the day that the first mentions focus on. Now, this differs radically from Tina Foster. It differs slightly from Mike Williams, who has Paul, just one of many people, and then he's replaced, and it's probably the 11th. I think that this slide that I'm showing you corrects what that actual image was supposed to be. That it was a much simpler thing to derive. 13 letters for Paul McCartney. And you notice this from Yellow Submarine. It's 4 and 9. 4 and 9 is 13. But it also is the date. In other words, if you're going to put this on here, you're going to want a date. You're going to want a name. Well, lucky. Paul had 13 letters, and I think died on the turn of the day from the 12th to the 13th. So whether he died 5 minutes before midnight or 5 minutes after could be represented as the guy who was 13 letters died on the 13th. And the way that I do this is I say, instead of dividing it as 11 and then IX, those are Arabic and then Roman and all that, I think it was, well, XIII flipped. It's IIIX. It's a backward, it's a satanic reversal. It's also a coding reversal to hide it even more. IIIX, what does that mean? Okay, but I think that it's a very simple concept to come up with. And I think that when we overcomplexify what people were doing to come up with it at the beginning, I think that's a problem. I'm not saying that operations aren't extremely complex, but they always have some basic, simple issues. They always have some simple stuff. And so Sir Paul is making it more complex now, and he's turning himself instead of the Ra, and he's turning him instead of the Horus, he's turning him up into the Ra, and then you got all this stuff, and everyone thinks it's all mystical. It's like, no, he's trying to be God. He's trying to say he's the more inspired. So this here is my argument, that though it has been divided into II and IX, or 1-1 and IX, and it can also be read as 3 Beatles and an X1, I think it also is 13 backwards. And I think that that is a very simple way to account for actually the Melody Makers Awards when you know a lot about them, and the faking of the Melody Maker Awards pictures when you know about them, and the Bloody Tuesday. And also there is a slide there with information on the broadcast. It has a lightning bolt, if you can find that one.
Yeah, I remember seeing that one.
Okay,
You
there was.
mentioned Romans 13 on this slide?
No, I wasn't. I was saying Roman numeral 13 backwards.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was looking up the chapter, and it's like, oh, it's written by Paul the Apostle, and it's all about, they revised the 10 Commandments, and never mind.
Well, I mean, there may be other reasons to do it, but what I'm saying is, although we can riff off on other possibilities, I think that they can actually mislead us, because what happens is, I think the basic issue is, it's not the 11th. But it got us very close to think 11 and 9 and 9 and 11, and I don't think it is.
I wanted to also add that Tuesday is...
Oh, that's it, yeah. That's it.
Tuesday is Mars Day, so if people want to consider the idea of it being a sacrifice, the same as, was it 9/11 on a Tuesday? Isn't that...
I don't know, but the 13 also works, witchy cults. I mean, the point is that I know that this stuff is involved, but I think we have to look at the case and say, whatever they were, and I hate people who say, what they? Who are they? We're dealing with whoever they did it. It's like, that a VW Beetle car in the middle of a jungle wasn't made by the chimps. There was a they that made it, so whoever made it. Okay. I hope it wasn't the chimps, or we really do have divine intervention. No, in a bad way. So this thing about the news flash, there was a news flash and a pilot episode. They are different. There was a news flash, and one of the things, you asked me what was special about me, one of the things is I got the first 2 legal testimonies in the case. So I was the person who arranged. Pardon?
You did personally.
I did, yeah. I worked with, I'm just shocked at how many people, even on side issues like this newsflash, do not want to sign a legal document. It's stunning. I'm like, but it just helps. It just shows you're willing to sign it. They're like, no, I mean, that might make me, no, I just want to know that Paul died. I'm fine. It's like, what are you afraid of? So I'm telling you, the very fact that out of probably 1 million people who saw this, I got one is pretty impressive. So out of about 6 people, it was winnowed to about one, well, 2 did it, and 1 wouldn't sign. Told me, that's what a redacted document is. And I said, no, it isn't. You're supposed to sign it, and then I redact it. So basically, my friend Bob Shorts did the only legal testimony that this occurred, and I helped him. I asked him questions. Well, where exactly were you? What exactly were you thinking? Like, what quality of light was it outside? He said, well, actually, I don't want to say, but I was coming out from the bathroom. I said, well, say that. It shows it's likely a real memory. So I did get a legal testimony on it. And that news broadcast was aired at just after midnight on September 13th, UK time. So it also matches the 13th, and it matches the midnight, which has other reasons to believe it was around nighttime. Now, but it was aired in the USA and then in Australia. Okay? So this was a worldwide broadcast. The actual news was aired, and it was aired not only on TV, which is what Bob Shorts' testimony was. It was also aired on radio. Now, I don't have legal testimony to those ones, but I know from various people I've talked to that it happened on the radios, and it was happening also in the UK on the BBC. There was a brief announcement, I guess the next day. I don't know. But anyway, the issue is that this broadcast probably leaked. Now, this is different than the TV show broadcast. There's the TV show broadcast, pilot, and then there's the Monkeys broadcasting of the news. And for Bob Shorts, the news broadcast was a news flash. It was something that was done when there was very important news. It was coming up at 9 or 11 on the news, and breaking news. This is, of course, in Sesame Street with charmingly Kermit the Frog, dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, the little teletype and Morse code, and then Kermit the Frog reporting to you, right? So that's what this was, and it went out on the main airwaves, including the TV airwaves, starting 7:30 p.m. Well, 7:45 by the time that the second advertising break happened, 7:45 Eastern Standard Time, and that is 12:45 a.m. UK time. So you think about that. If Paul had died about half an hour before, there was just enough time to get the news leaked and not be able quite to cover it up yet. That's what I think happened. And this is a totality argument. There's these numbers and reinterpreting them on the death date clue. There's also the news broadcast issue, very important. And then there's the Stupid Bloody Tuesday. And then there's the fact that he disappears around there unless, like Tina, thinks that there was an amazing double at the end. And Mike Williams, too. An absolutely amazing double. Looks quite a lot like Paul. It's amazing until... But you see, I'd say it was Paul until this point. Now,
what was the news flash exactly? What did they report?
Well, the report, good question. The report was at first a Beatle has been seriously injured in a car accident. More news at 9 or more news at 11 or whatever. And several kids stayed up or begged to stay up, and their parents said, no, and there was nothing on. I don't know, well, and they were discussing it afterwards. Now, I only have one formal signed testimony to this, but the various people who've talked about this, and Tina covers a little bit of this in her book, but she doesn't give it the weight or say that there is legal testimony. Then, the USA was tending to broadcast major shows like the Monkeys, which this was. It tended to broadcast them in double slots, so Eastern Standard Time and Central Standard Time were broadcast together. So there was a 7:30, 6:30 conflation. They got this at the same time, and some people heard the news flash. Then there would be the Mountain and Pacific. They were broadcast together. So the Mountain has 7:30 and Pacific has 6:30. Same time, though, on the planet in real absolute time. By that time, the people who heard it, some of them heard it on the radio and some of them heard it on the TV during the Monkeys show again, heard that Beatle Paul had died, or that Beatle Paul was seriously injured, or that Beatle Paul had been in a car accident more news at 11 or whatever. So it had developed, it had seemingly developed between the two periods. Now, there may already have been an announcement on the East Coast, but in general, the people on the East Coast talk about not an absolute knowing, and then the people on the West Coast or the mountains say there was. By the time it got to Australia the next morning, it was quite final. Paul had died. That was on the news. And then the kids came home, and now it wasn't everybody took notice, and not everybody's going to speak up. And I realize it sounds weird to have hundreds of, thousands of people who watched or noticed or got the broadcast, and only one or two almost signed and one signed. Yeah, I realize that. But the fact is that it already was a very strange situation with lots of different people with different stories saying this and saying it intensely and sticking by their story, though they had anonymity on the internet. Just sticking by it for many months, saying, no, man, whatever happened, I don't know, but I knew from when I was 5, because I tried to get my parents, this kind of very honest type speaking.
Right.
The other aspect of this is very important. The actual show, the show itself was a pilot. That was the Monkees pilot project. And
this is very important. Okay, so we need to put exclamation marks on both ends of this.
Yes,
the
and
pilot happened on the same night that Paul McCartney died. The homunculus, whatever.
Yes, it not only happened. It not only happened. Okay, the details of it are going to blow your mind, but hopefully not the same way Paul's mind was blown, and not by drugs. Well, no, because people joke about that. They say, well, his mind was blown, he got into drugs. No, his head was blown apart. Okay? It's a very, very serious issue. So, are you showing me again? Okay, good, you're showing us again. Okay, so it's a very serious issue. If this happened, it's ugly. This is why on my blog page, I show a picture of a guy. He's facing a little away, so it's not as gross. But his head is blasted out, and his bones are kind of collapsed, but his eyes are closed. It's not quite as bad, but he's kind of smooshed. Why? Because that's what we're talking about. If it happened, just as if let's say Jesus resurrected, if he did, that's what you're actually talking about. You're not talking about something else. So I'm bringing that up to.
This is like a couple of years after the president's head blown off on TV?
Right.
Yes, exactly. So, November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy was killed by a consortium at the Freemasonic Center of Dallas for LBJ, but also for international conspirators. Okay? That's what happened. I don't have time to prove it. That's what happened. Now, given that, and we have to, I just wish, it's like, now you have to prove every point because people aren't up, but okay, that's what happened. All right. Now, 3 years later, not even slightly, Paul's dead. I believe on September 13th, but right at midnight, 12/13th, because it could be 2 minutes before and the news gets, I'm saying it's right around midnight. And there's evidence actually from Yellow Submarine, which you love, that it was at midnight. During the Eleanor Rigby song, a photograph from Liverpool of a newsroom, which wasn't a newsroom, it was actually a picture, a panel in a pub, which says newsroom, is stopped at 12. So it's either 12 noon or 12 midnight. Do you understand what I'm saying? And almost all of the imagery is of the death at night. So I believe it was 12/13. I also believe that from the broadcast. So back to the Monkees. So what happened with the Monkees? There was a pilot program, and it was about 2 or 3 weeks before the show normally started. They made 2 pilots. In the original pilot, which is available online, it's not very good, the Beatles were referenced. There were actually photos of the Beatles in the background.
Wow.
The pilot that they chose to run, which is a bit better, is fairly complex, has Davy Jones. Now, I'm going to do what I did earlier about the murder. For PR reasons, I'm not claiming anybody knew anything. All right?
Can I interject something? Okay, when they say in Britain Davy Jones' locker, is Davy
Yes.
Jones mean something in British parlance?
Well, yes, and actually Tina Foster brilliantly brought this up in a recent book. It was a marvelous point. And it's sad that she once called me a spy. I'm not a spy. I know a few. I'm not a spy. I don't know any personally, but I mean, I don't know, I've seen some behavior that's very obvious. But Davy Jones' locker was a reference to a pirate. I don't know if he was historical or he was metaphorical, but where he would call up the dead from underground of all the shipwrecks, and he would use those dead people to, it was his locker down there of the dead with the shipwrecks. So basically it's a death reference.
Okay.
Okay, now, I do not believe that Davy Jones, the singer, who was a brilliant young man, who was a singer and a fresh young man, and he really wanted to sing, and he was in Oliver, and he was great, and he was on the Ed Sullivan Show with the Beatles, so he knew the originals, okay? I don't believe his name was made up. Okay, let's be really careful, because I mean, I just get so sick of the woolly-headedness that does come into this. But I do believe that very probably when those monkeys were chosen, someone who, and again, I didn't say that Paul was murdered, but if he was murdered, someone who knew that would have made that choice. Because to put Davy Jones in the monkeys for a couple of reasons. He's cute, he's short. Paul was actually a bit shorter than Bill. He's also English. He's the only English monkey. Okay? He's English. He was, I think, Birmingham or something. He was Manchester, somewhere up there. And he plays the cute beetle. I mean, he's always seen the cute beetle. I always found him really too short, but whatever. He was cute. And he's the English beetle. And on that pilot, which I'm not saying, for my disclaimer is nobody knew anything. Very important, okay? But I'll make a case that they might have. We're together here,
Yeah,
Tracy?
yeah.
Okay, okay. Very important that we do this because I want this out. But here's this pilot, the one that was chosen. The previous pilot had obvious Beatle references, and then it devolved into stupidity. The second one is a murder plot at midnight.
Yes.
Where Davy Jones is killed but not killed. He's saved at the stroke of midnight as a sword is about to go through his heart. And it played half hour after midnight on the UK. It didn't play in the UK, but in the USA on Eastern Standard Time, it was 7:30 to 8, and that would be 12:30 to 1 o'clock UK time. And so the cute beetle, who's English, is saving a royal, and I haven't gotten to this yet, but I will in a moment, from her assassination, and instead they turn on him, and at the stroke of midnight, when she comes into her own and she's going to be queen, right at that stroke she says, "Stop," and he's saved.
Wow.
Now, I'm not impugning anyone, and I think it's very important to have a legal disclaimer, but what is the name of the young woman whom Davy Jones, with that death association in his name, and the cute beetle, cute monkey, the man who knew the monkeys, he's an Englishman, Davy Jones's locker, the dead of the pirates, and all of that. What is the woman he's trying to save? She's a German.
Is it Elizabeth? I don't know. I'm guessing.
No. She's a German, although they give it a strange name. It's a strange, country that she's ruling, but her uncle Otto is trying to steal her patrimony, and if he can kill her and kill the man who's protecting her, who is the Paul figure, okay, if Otto can kill them off, then he becomes king. But instead, at the stroke of midnight, Davy Jones, with all of this back and forth, and the antics of the '60s, he manages to save Bettina long enough, and her name is Bettina, and she's a German. with an Uncle Otto. And who is the only acknowledged, even if she isn't biologically, the only acknowledged Paul daughter is Bettina of Germany.
Wow.
But I'm not saying anybody knew anything, and I'm not saying Paul was murdered.
Whoa.
And I yeah.
Well, we don't know. We're obviously we're only speculating. We have no idea what really happened.
Right, there's absolutely no idea. Yeah, right, okay.
Okay, so like in a couple of years or within a very short time frame, plus or minus, and you tell me, okay, so this movie Yellow Submarine comes out where the Beatles have a whole band that is alter egos.
Yes, they're old selves. They're happier selves, although they're dressed as Sergeant Pepper. They're happier selves, and they have to revivify the world that has lost love and hope. And the whole thing is premised on a death in Liverpool, late of, and the Eleanor Rigby song, and the number 49 here lie buried, which is a language trick, because on that gravestone during the Eleanor Rigby sequence, it's 4 and 9, which you would say here lies, wait a minute, number singular, 4, 9 here lie, plural, buried. Well, what that means is it's one person but two names. So you don't read it as 49. It's number, meaning it's an entity is dead here, but it's two numbers. Read them as lie, read them together, or like read them separately together as Paul McCartney. So person Paul McCartney here lies buried, but the name has a plurality of two names, 4 and 9. And then at the bottom it says Macmillan. So it has a Mick name. Maybe you can find that slide with the Campbell on there, because what it is that Bill is likely a Campbell, and Mike Williams with Memoirs is, in my view, confusing this, and he calls him Billy Shears. He calls him Bill Shepherd. And I think Bill's here explains Billy Shears, but there's also the idea that Shakespeare might have been replaced. I don't actually think Shakespeare was, but the idea would also have been in their minds. There's also other aspects to the Shears issue of shearing a sheep and goat worship of the Satanists that people bring in. I'm just mentioning these things. I'm not claiming that anyone is exactly why they put Shears, but I do not believe it's his name. And Tina Foster makes the mistake, in my view, of dismissing the Campbell name also the same way that Mike Williams does. And Mike Williams then defers and says, I don't care what his name is, which is kind of a cop-out on that. But Tina Foster, she says, that it's not Bill, it doesn't have to be Campbell, and because the man who produced that name first disavowed it under pressure. But where do you get the name Campbell? I mean, Campbell's so normal with no other meaning.
Hold on. So you're saying Mike Williams?
It's a Campbell slide. It's got black and green.
No, stop me when I get to it. But you're saying Mike Williams is no longer saying he thinks the man's name is William Campbell?
Well, no, he never did. He was always saying, well, I don't really know, but I think he's Bill Shepherd.
Oh, that's right, Bill Shepherd. I'm sorry. I'm multitasking here, so.
And you can see these are lovely slides, which I don't mind if you stay on them. Okay, that's a question of just to help people see what Bill might look like without preconceptions. I'm not saying that person in the picture is Bill. What I'm saying is, if you get to know that kind of a face shape, it's nothing like Vivian Stanshall. It's nothing like Phil Ackrell. It's nothing like Tara Brown, whom we were going to talk about. It's nothing like a bit of latex looking weird. That's a different bone structure.
Right.
And I believe that if we learn to see the bone structure, then in any, let's see, I'll put my face right up to the camera. See how it distorts?
Hold on. Let me get you back to the camera. Do that one more time for us, Claire. No, that's fine. It's just if I was on the slide, if you'll do it one more time so people can see the lens distortion, I think that's a good point to see, because this is something everyone should test this.
What it is this is a three-dimensional. Now, I studied sculpture. It's a three-dimensional distortion. It's not a mere rounding. What happens is, as I throw my head like that, or whatever, anything further away distorts. So the nose tip is wider, but then the beyond it is rounder, but pulled back, and then everything else is shortened. It's actually a three-dimensional in-camera distortion. Does that make sense? Whereas if I just take a picture of me, which actually right now I will be a little less overall distorted because it's not having to fill the whole frame. I mean, I'm still distorted. Actually, every camera has distortion, but I'm less so. If I took a picture and then rounded it, it's not the same. Not the same things three-dimensionally will stretch and in certain angles. So it's very important to understand what lens distortion and lighting impression and so on do before one says, oh, that's a new person for every photo. Right. Very important. So, I mean, that's one of the points. So there is a slide there that says Campbell. Okay, if you want to pull it up, maybe you can do it while they're not looking.
I don't know if it'll
find it.
Here, I'll go back to just you. I had your whole face bigger there so people could really maybe see it. So
no.
I'm gonna see. I don't think it'll let me scroll slides unless I have it on the screen. This is the first time I've tried to use a folder with slides with OBS. So forgive me for.
I'm so sorry. Well, then.
Oh no, it's fine. We'll just get to the one that says Campbell. I mean,
Okay, and.
There's a joke, Claire, that our show is a 3-hour sound check. That's when somebody commented that in an early show that they love our show because it's like a 3-hour sound check. So we kind of embrace that here, in case you haven't noticed. So.
Okay, well at least you can leave them up slightly longer, enough for people to be able to pause them, because they're so important. These slides have no junk in them. There's no junk. I mean, you can add stuff in, which people are doing, but there's no junk in it. There's not, like, I didn't make slides with anything that has, that some people add in. It has the satanic issue in it. I refer to it, but the point is that okay, that's that slide. You see, it's green and black.
Yeah, I'm just.
It'll say Campbell.
Yeah, it seems like I've come full circle. Some of them are when I get to the. Picture.
That's a testimony, yeah. That's the ears. That's a reminder.
Oh, wait, here I've got. You're seeing what I'm seeing here, right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm seeing a lot of windows.
yeah, that's it. Welcome to the back.
So Tracy, do you see what I was saying about number 49?
There we go. That's the one.
Oh, there it is. There it is. Okay, so there we have Campbell. There are many indications he's a Campbell, and although Fred LeBoer demurred under pressure and said, well, I mean, I was going to say McGuire or something, but I just thought, I think the Campbell thing, it's a very interesting thing. I think there was a leak. For example, in 1969, fascinatingly, in the USA, the very first reference in 69 that was in print was in Iowa in the Delphic Oracle newspaper. Okay, for the student newspaper, it was called the Delphic. And it came out on September 17th, 1969. And September 17th was the very first day of the formal cover-up. That was the day the Melody Makers was in stores saying that Paul had been alive on the 13th.
Okay.
So again, I mean, we can't get into all of this stuff, but I think that the cumulative and interlocking quality of the evidence makes it what you could call reasoning to the best explanation. And that does not mean that I stultified early, I didn't look at the other stuff, or I was not aware deeply of the things that Mike Williams and so on feel that they are bringing out now. I am so deeply imbued in that. I spent 10,000 hours with Ted Gunderson and arguments back and forth about satanic CIA and so on. I know it intimately. What I'm saying is that I am careful to say that we have a case. It is disrespectful to the dead if they're dead to be too broad swathed in our approach to the evidence. And Mike has even called it boring. I mean, Paul, and we can't even know him very well. And well, the part of that's the cover-up. Okay, as you said, for people to echo, Paul McCartney was the first John Lennon, but Paul McCartney, the real Paul McCartney was the first John Lennon. The second guy really isn't at all. He's actually a cover-up artist.
Yeah, he
mostly.
toes the line. He's
Yeah, very much.
It's like they when they took out John, they couldn't do it the same way they took out Paul because they had already done that and people were already catching on. So to, have a high-profile assassination was more the style at that point than.
What's very interesting about the John Lennon killing, and I am an expert on that, and unfortunately the broadcast about that, which was out on Jim Fetzer's radio show, has now been taken down. It was a wonderful 2-hour show with me and another person. It was me first hour and them second hour. I know that case very well, and I know some things that I can't talk about. So what I'll say is that case was an ambush. Definitely an ambush. And in a way, it was almost as though, again, it didn't happen. You see, you had this mass grieving, and it was immediately turned into no questions. Right? It was mass grieving. It was a little bit more like a Kennedy death, but it was not out in the open. There were no witnesses. No normal witnesses.
Which is really weird. Yeah.
People don't realize that. There were a few ear witnesses, and one of them later kind of lied about what was going on. That's a whole shady thing. But there was, Yoko was present, the limo driver was present. It probably was a limo driver that was switched for the purpose of, that's what I guess.
We might need to get you back on another show with this whole different subject.
Well, I'm sorry, yeah, we shouldn't digress.
No, that's not what I mean. I'm inviting you potentially to come back for another episode sometime in the future, may not, because that's a whole different subject, but if you're an expert on the assassination of John Lennon.
Yeah, unfortunately I am. I did that first, and I one of the ways that I was led to this Paul Death case, and you could say it's spiritual or psychic or something if people want to believe in that, is that as I was pursuing, you could see it as my own psychological volition, or you could say it felt like I was being led, okay? It felt like that. That doesn't mean I was. But as I was looking through materials increasingly on John Lennon and speaking to his potential spirit, saying, if you're around, I really want to help. Wow. And the Paul thing almost fell in my lap. Like I had done so much work on the John case and seen the ambush and read all of the biographies of him, even the so-called banned biographies, and found that they corresponded quite a bit with what I would expect, and that I wasn't horrified. I almost felt like the spirit of John Lennon was saying, you still love me? That was the feeling. Now, of course, you could say it was just me having an inner reaction, but it was really a feeling like, yeah, I gotta still love you. I kind of forgive you, but whoa, that was bad, And then Paul died. I lied. If you look at it in that almost spiritual, personal encounter sort of way, nobody has to look at it that way, and I'm not claiming I'm a channeler. What I'm saying is, though, if it felt like that, it's almost like, now do you love me? That was the kind of feeling, because I said to myself, wow, that's a big one.
No, that's really
it's
deep.
even
Wow.
almost worse than satanic. It's a big public lie, and it's in that sense, it's worse. It's certainly not worse than a satanic. But it just feels so bad, and I do this for them, dead and alive. I do it for them. It's not really for me. And that allows me to say, look, I'm willing to be open to any idea. But I do know historiography. I know philosophy issues. I'm not perfect, I'm willing to be radically open. But some of this stuff is woolly. It's wild. It doesn't work. And Mike Williams just unfortunately put out a video, which I think might have been mostly aimed at Tina Foster, but might have been aimed at me and who knows who else, in saying that some people claim special contacts. He's claimed special contacts. He's claimed he knows insiders around Bill. Right? He's claimed he knows a producer and this kind of stuff. So I don't know why he's picking that up. And he also says that we have stultified. Our long experience with the case is basically at the beginning. So it's like we spent 10 years, but it was our attitudes. We were done in the first year, and really he's the one moving forward. That's why I said Mike Williams is a memoirs expert. And having done textual criticism of Latin texts, I know you can be an expert in in a text without being an expert in the arguments of what that text combines with other evidence and so on. You see, so he doesn't understand lens distortion. He knows it exists, but there's some very, very obvious cases of lens distortion where a person's head distorts only from lens distortion. It's not a natural injury kind of distortion. That's different when someone has encephalitis or something. You can really tell it distorts differently. So he looks at these lens distorted images and says, but that's got to be a different Paul, right? Or he says, Vivian Stanshall has changed. He's really changed. I said, I don't see it. What I see is Vivian Stanshall in later images looking a bit more mature and wearing strange glasses and so on. But he had a whole life story. So Mike Williams has to project the idea with memoirs that someone else died for Vivian in Vivian's apartment. Someone else was living as Vivian, and Bill was the real Vivian because there was never a real Vivian. It was always a character. Now, the reason that the Vivian Stanshall stuff started was that Vivian Stanshall moves sort of mechanically a little bit in some of the Magical Mystery Tour film footage when he's singing Death Cab for Cutie, which was a PID song written by the Friends of the Beatles, Vivian Stanshall, and Neil Innes, who were heads of the band, and they obviously were asked to perform that song in the movie. So Bill, as Paul, is missing from the scene in Magical Mystery Tour, and then here's Vivian Stanshall. So what happened was people said, maybe that's Bill. Maybe that's the replacement. And then was added the idea of latex. I'm not saying latex was never used, but the idea that Bill's head could change into Vivian Stanshall's face with latex. And then it was mostly only available with bad quality images, again. And when you take really good quality images, you see every little twitch and movement of Vivian's face. It's probably Vivian. And then we see Vivian in some strange guises later because he liked to dress up. Okay, yet Bill, whenever Bill is there, he's either distorted to look a little more like Paul or he looks really strange and himself. He doesn't, it's not like he's just being wild like Vivian. So what I would say is poor Vivian died and he was Vivian. And this is confusion. And Vivian may have been murdered, but officially I'm not saying that. Okay? So the reason is that there was fire in the apartment, and Vivian died right around the time that some other things were happening. Right. And we've got Tony Barrow, who died 4 days from Mark Lane. And we've got a fellow who recently died, not this past September, but the September before, who was called Johnny Guitar, and he was one of Epstein's guitarists. And one of the bands, it was in the Foremost, it was called FOUR, and they were people who were in university and they were doing high-end physics and stuff. And they wanted to finish their degrees before they became a band, like full-time. So they kind of missed the bandwagon, to talk puns. But they were signed by Epstein. They were well-known. They were part of the British invasion. And when he died on September 17th again. And I said to myself, well, what did he die of? Nothing in most of the articles. Some obituaries, they just don't, they're just adulatory. But I went and found one article said he had just finished his memoirs. My point is, the numbers of people who, and I'm not claiming this, may have died for this, and for any such case, are hundreds and hundreds, if it's true. Okay? And you can't know with any one person exactly, but you begin to see, gosh, the two fathers, the father of Paul McCartney, the real one, and the father of John Lennon, who wasn't replaced, and I can't even get into that, the real one, okay, they died within 2 weeks. It was actually 14 days. One died on April 1st, which is April Fool's, and the other one died of a very short term. One died of short-term cancer, and the other one died of a short-term pneumonia. Okay, and they die 2 weeks apart. One is on April Fool's. Now we can ask other questions. For instance, Paul McCartney's own mother died on Halloween Day. She died of Halloween Day of an embolism. And an embolism is easy to give in hospital. It's given by air or water in a syringe. And by the way, that is, Jim Fetzer has covered this, and there's a wonderful book about it. That is the way that General, who's the wonderful general of the Second World War, USA there, General, not MacArthur, who screwed things up, but the other one, you know, the one who's so beloved.
Patton.
General Patton, that's how he was killed. Now, I can't go into that.
In a car accident.
Can't go into that.
Patton was murdered in a car accident, wasn't he?
Well, no, you see, the car accident didn't work, and he was recovering. And then the guy who wrote the book on that issue, and it's a wonderful book about the assassination of General Patton, and he argues beautifully, and he met witnesses, and he talked about the accident was insufficient to do the work, and I mean, he ended up in hospital, and he was recovering. And about a day before he was supposed to be sent home, 2 days before, he starts to get really worse. And he dies. And the only thing that the book writer didn't know was exactly how they did it. Well, another woman came onto Jim Fetzer's show later, and as I said, I used to listen to 10,000 hours. I mean, I listened to just about everybody. And so what you do is you often get a little piece here and a little piece there. And yes, you can't believe everybody, but this woman, I won't mention her name right now. She was a piano, she was international star, and she talks and talks and blah blah blah, but like really, you know, like I'm the diva. And she said she and her then husband her husband had always suspected the death of General Patton was a murder. He was in the army or the navy or something. He said we all thought, you know. And they were watching a TV show in the USA in the 70s, and they heard a doctor come on. This is how it kind of happens. It's like little things happen. But, you know, very few people notice them, really make a note. And she said, he turned to me and he says, oh, my goodness. And what the doctor had said is, he said, I wrote a little book in German. I was there when General Patton of the USA died. And he said, and I wondered what was making him sicker. I thought, what is happening? And I followed one of the interns or the nurses, or it was something like the young doctors or something. And she went to a room and she was filling the syringes with water. Wow. And he died of an embolism. Ultimately, he had a stroke, an embolism. The point I'm making here is that it's pieces. And she said they tried so hard to find out about that book. It was nowhere when they went to look for it, right? They tried everywhere in Germany. They asked, they couldn't remember. Several years later, they decided they had to go and get that footage or talk to that doctor. So what I'm saying here is that Mary McCartney dies of an embolism, very short injury, and she dies on Halloween Day. Now, I don't believe she was involved in witchcraft. That's not the claim I'm going to make, and there is a reason for that I cannot talk about right here. But I believe that there was a reason that Mary McCartney was killed before Paul was famous. And I believe that it is not necessarily that the Beatles were just set up to become Tavistockian weirdos that didn't write their own music, that weren't the dedicated, wonderful young men or anything. But I do think that it's very possible that John Lennon's mother and Mary McCartney were also murders here. That is taking us back a bit. Forward, once Paul dies, the two fathers die under suspicious circumstances if you consider the date of death of one of them and how proximal they were dead and how short the illnesses were. And then you find, I mean, I don't even want to go into all of them because I actually am somewhat afraid of bringing them up. Because if we bring them up and we...
Oh, we understand. You don't have to explain, Claire. Tracy's had some bad experiences that we tippy-toe and walk on eggshells around a number of subjects. And
right. So I'll just talk statistically. When you know certain things, the statistics change. See, statistics is not done just on the broad swathe. It's also done knowing. So what is the likelihood there would be a Claire sitting here in the universe if you take the whole thing very low, right? But if you begin to know more and more about where she might be and what she might come from, and and so on. I mean, you get the point. I don't even think I need to lead you to that conclusion.
Nope, we understand.
Yeah. So this is the thing about these sorts of deaths. Yes, sorry you missed a lot, but that's okay. This is the thing about these sorts of deaths. Yes, there's a statistical average. Yes, we know that there's lots of deaths and so on. But I think that some or all of them, so from one to all, are murders. Okay, that means you don't know which ones in all cases. You can say certain ones are more likely. Certain ones are actually murders, like John Lennon, for many reasons, not only PID. He was murdered, and we know he was murdered. But then I mean a murder that's linked more suspiciously. Okay, so some are officially murders, some are not. You have the same problem in the Kennedy case, like people ending up macheted on their doorstep the day before they're supposed to testify at the Garrison trial. Well, I guess it could happen, but they're not alone. So again, we have to understand different types of evidence, and maybe I can leave it on that point. If you've shown the slides, if you've shown people,
I did.
Did you go through
what I did is I went and changed the setting to change automatically, and it's
awesome.
And I just left it on the screen, and I can actually. I'll tell you what I'll do. The tradition here on Picture Show is to say, okay, bye. And so I think we're about to the point where we'll call this all good, and I'll switch it back over to the slides, and I'll just let them roll. And what I'll do is I'll pick up the guitar.
That's kind of you. That's kind of you.
That way people can see them, screen capture them.
These are important slides. They're not BS.
And
the other testimony I got was with a claimant to being Paul's son. He gave his DNA.
Yep, I remember that story.
And I did nothing more with it. But the point is, what is a testifier, and how do you trust witness testimony, and what is good evidence, and how do you say it's a proof? Now, this John Lennox, whom I never actually got back to, and maybe this was my point, but I don't remember. His point was he very rarely, Dr. John Lennox, the mathematician, pure mathematician, and I've done some pure math myself. Dr. John Lennox says, and he's a very jolly sort of older man with a wide face from Northern Ireland, and he's so friendly. Okay, so he says, you notice I did not use the term proof. He says, I mean, proof is only available in my science. If we are willing to call pure mathematics a science, that's another discussion, but it is only available there and the reason that proofs, now the issues that go into a mathematical proof are in these other cases. There's aspects of them that overlap. But the thing that is not there is the preset status of each action or actor, each operand and operator in the system. So for instance, you set it up with 1, and you can do a plus, and you can have a 1, and you can have an equals and something else. You have set up all of mathematics. You have already defined what you are going to talk about, and then you go about finding out what it does thereafter. Now, of course, mathematics is absolutely awesome. It's very interesting, actually. It's like a dance. It's, an increasing set of options, and then what happens within those options, and then there's options within options, and so on. It's actually quite beautiful. But it comes down to a 1 and the ability to add. That's actually what it comes down to. It's very short. So it's a preset argument, but then we'll have preset answers if you do the logic right. And that's where a lot of mathematicians find the logic questions fascinating. What can I do with this? And what can I ask? And what was the question of? We didn't quite define that. So that's a semantic issue. And so that's where you get into abstract mathematics. These cases can never be proven. This is an extremely important point. Technically speaking, you never have a proof. You have an excellent excellent or more excellent argument. You have it with evidence, from evidence, and to evidence. You have it with varying degrees of understanding of the common sense options you need, and that is called informed common sense. The more you go forward, the more you inform what you're going to call common sense.
The vast majority of this kind of work is all based on informed common sense, because that's the same reason we use such discretion with some topics. True, absolute, certain evidence that proves something, especially anything that's a current affair, is such a liability that you're a damn fool if you demonstrate your knowledge of it because of all the other things you mentioned. You don't come right out and say, yes, I know for sure blank, because then you're a target. You put a target on your back if you do that. So we have to be very careful.
Yes, and a target on those whom I would make the grand claim I am protecting. Do you understand? We have to understand that the people, it's not merely Bill, although Bill needs protection, I'm sure, up to a point. And there's so many people who know this. And unlike a lot of the cases where there's a lot of people who know it, and that, heck, anything can happen and they can cover it up because a lot of people don't want to know. So it's not really that well covered up, but it's covered up enough that most people don't want to know and do the work. But in this case, most of the people didn't want to be participants. And that is a very interesting scenario. And compared to John Lennon's assassination, where it's a side little ambush, and it was done at the lame duck sessions between presidents, and there was a CIA, or probably there was the same name, same description as the head of the Operation 40 anti-Castro Cuban CIA assassination squad, which was started just before Kennedy was killed. That guy was there for we don't know how many nights, because a serious researcher, tried to get the information and they wouldn't give it, of how many nights that guy had been working there. He was the armed guard. But there actually was another man present that most people don't know of. When the police got there, there was a shaggy-looking, somewhat very suspicious looking. The police thought he'd done it. It wasn't Chapman, and it wasn't Perdomo, who was supposedly the CIA guard. It was a man who they wrote down as an elevator man or a repairman. So he would have had a coat, easy to hide a gun. He looked scruffy. We never get his name ever. And when this researcher tried to get the documents of the original police notes, he was explicitly refused on the form by the NYPD. His website has now been taken down. Before that, somebody put that it had viruses all over it. So you would tend not to want to go there. I clicked anyway, I was fine. This was done recently to my website, by the way. We mentioned my website. You can know sometimes at blogspot.com. The other day, for 2 days, it wouldn't work for anybody. And it was virus warnings. You can't go there. Now, it's back. So this guy tries to get the NYPD.
Actually, can I interrupt? Sorry to interrupt, but the thing is that something similar just happened to my website within about 5 minutes of us going to air, right before we went to air.
Jim and I witnessed it live. Tracy's, she pops into the chat. Her face is preeminent in the camera like yours is right now. And I said, "What's wrong, Tracy?" And she says, "My website just went offline." And she sat there for 10, 15 minutes. Tracy, you got it back up, and then it happened again.
No, I didn't get it back up.
Oh,
I don't know that I got it back up. The only way I was able to see it again was to put a, anonymizer. I'm forgetting the name.
Your VPN.
I put a VPN on, and that was the only way I could get to see my own website, which I had been updating just minutes before.
Right, and I'm not surprised at all, because it would have some relevance to this talk, and this wasn't announced except about 10 minutes before we were on, practically. So now the entire server set and even a physical tower had what was claimed a lightning strike, but the whole thing went down the last time I spoke, not on Mike Williams, but on the other. Now, this is the kind of stuff, when I first learned about these cases, I would hear people saying this, And I thought, really?
Yeah, these people are nuts, right? How paranoid. They must be really losing
Well,
it.
yeah, and I did see some who probably were leaping to conclusions or, it's happening to me again. You know, it's not always happening. But the point is, it does happen. So this guy, he wrote this set of articles on John Lennon's assassination. He didn't get everything right, I think. I mean, I really think he went off on certain things, but he compiled some amazing things, and he tried to get the NYPD. He put in FOIA requests with the NYPD, and one thing he asked for was the police notes. They checked refused. Okay, that was actually refused. He also asked, he actually phoned the company that had been the security company and asked, like, how long was Perdomo working there? They started to answer, you know, he got a little ways and then no answer. I think that the lower end didn't know what, you know, they didn't know what the upper end knew. And then he also asked the NYPD in another sort of FOIA request, he asked them for the photos of John Lennon's assassination. And they put, cannot find. So now, officially, yes, sometimes photos are shifted to another department. But you're telling me that the photos of one of the most famous, I mean,
Well, we hear it over and over again, right?
They just went,
They lost the
listen.
president's brain. They lost the
Right.
file for Marilyn Monroe. I mean,
They
oopsie,
lost all
you
of
know,
the real footage of the moon landing.
Moon landing.
Oh yeah, right,
All
right.
of it,
No,
all of it.
absolutely, absolutely. And also 10,000 pages were stolen in the Franklin cover-up case, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Of the pedophiles and the killings, and it's also true that Jim Garrison said years later that he didn't realize that one of the guys who was sort of in his department or worked for him, he was carrying out a briefcase every night with stuff. My point is, it's not so unthinkable, and I don't try to leap to the conclusion, but so it's there. So anyway, so I think that knowing what a proof is, and that we're not seeking actually that kind of proof. The other thing that I have as a real problem, I don't know if they've scrolled through the slides and we can put our faces back up. Is that possible? Have we gone
sure.
through all the slides already?
Yeah, I've gone through a few times.
At this point, yeah.
Okay, good. Because they're so important. Is that not only do we not ever try for an exact proof, that's not a correct approach. But also, evidence doesn't exactly tell us either. You can have evidence on either side. You can say this is evidence, and until you've decided, and you use the term evidence in a new way to mean the real evidence, okay, but that's a decision. You're forgetting you made a decision. Also, hearsay is not illegal. Hearsay is not even bad historical decision. Hearsay is part of making a decision. What it means is anyone who wasn't exactly there telling you something, and sometimes those people who were exactly there are outnumbered by the numbers of people who say in very specific circumstances, I heard this, or I saw this, or this was what happened to me, or this. That's more important than the person who's lying or staying silent. It's very important to recognize that. So I just think that evidence and reasoning and open-mindedness. Oh, and by the way, you did mention at the beginning, yes, Mike Williams cut a nice 20 minutes, very much more succinct than I did on memoirs. And the reason he did is, well, his broadcast was going a little long, but he cut exactly that 20 minutes. I do not believe he's working for Bill. I do not go that far. I do not believe what I believe is he is intellectually too dependent on that book. And what I said was, the book is real. It should be read. It probably is by Bill, though it's by Tom. It's not that great. It can acquaint you if you're not able to imagine how people get along in a devastating tragedy that they're covering up. It gives you some sense of that.
Claire, there's a couple things about the book I want to point out to people, just because I never read it, but I glanced at it. I listened to a lot of Mike's stuff about it, and it's encoded, which it has this weird boldness to the text, and so it's got some kind of, it's very Masonic. All of the art and the stuff is very Masonic, but it's got what's called encoding. I mean, the book says this about itself, that it's got bolded out sections that are encoded. And I also wanted to bring up that I remember it talks about them trying to get Paul McCartney's spirit to jump into Bill's body or something like that.
Yes,
So I
yes.
just,
And
for
I
people
did
curious,
handle some of that. I handled some of the attitude of people who get into occulty things in order to try to get over their grief. And then you've got this occultist in there who is trying to get, you see, it's probably true. That's probably true. But what I'm trying to get at is it writes Paul out of his own story. It doesn't deal with how wonderful he is. When it does, it claims, well, he was this pop singer and, you know, it wasn't that great. But on the other hand, he's the whole reason for this whole thing. So I guess he was great, which brings us back to that bubblegum poppy issue. If you listen to Paul, he's friendly, but he's great. Okay, and so the encoding is, I think it's also military encoding. I think we have to see this as the interest of Bill's, which he calls Shepherd, Bill Campbell, and Tom Harriet. By the way, Tom Harriet is an anagram. It's an anagram, two-way anagram. Okay, it means I met Shear's author. I met Shear, the author, and also our Shear hit team. The psychological hit team for Billy Shears, or if you will, for Bill Campbell. In other words, now, Tom Harriet has that name, and he's had it since a while back. But I think that in preparation for this book, I actually think that he changed his name, and several of his family members did, for the preparation. Now, does that mean it's a Freemasonic thing? Well, he's talked about being Freemasonic. And he's talked about getting out of the Mormons, but he couldn't get out of the Freemasons or stuff like that. He said things like this. Tom is a fairly nice guy. I think he really believes that Bill is quite the magical, wonderful guy, but he also has to say certain things. You see, and Mike Williams isn't taking that into account deeply. So what I said is, hey, read the book, but it writes Paul out of his own story, and that is the most important correction I would make to the book. It's not a specific information point. It's that in the original, Paul dies, John cries, and Bill's in. That's basically how it's written. The second one is written that way, but with more. Maybe Paul was just one of many, and maybe Bill was better, but it's still written as, this young guy, he was Horace, and I am Ra. And anyone who understands that is going to say, that's ridiculous. I mean, even if you don't believe. So there's a hubris in Bill that is so beyond what he even needs to do to tout his own case, even at arm's length. So, I mean, I do believe it is a real story, but I was challenging the efficacy of quoting it chapter and verse. I understand that you need to do that for any text. One of my studies was on 2 different Roman texts in translation. It was not, did not do the translation. 2 different Roman texts, and they were the only 2 Roman texts about a specific emperor doing a specific thing. And one was like the rag of the day, the wild rag that'll say anything about an emperor. And the other one was like some little, I forget what it was, some half lost military journal or something. And it was like, you can't know from those 2 texts alone who's telling what, or one has some truth in it because it might not. Ultimately, the decision rests on some logic about what the emperor likely did. But it isn't actually from those texts. You can be a textual scholar, and that's important. But you also need to know the other stuff without the text. Then you need to know it, as we said, about, what did you call it? Transduction, or I called it biduction. You need to bring both together. What is reasonable? What is not reasonable? Now, Mike Williams and a lot of these new people, or Tina to some degree, but more Mike Williams types, they tend to bring in the idea there cannot be a singularity. It can't be just to get Paul. It's got to be a bunch of swinging door doubles, and I've seen it in the photos, including this lens distorted face. Okay, so to make this point, and I hope I'm on the camera. Am I on the camera?
You are.
Okay,
yeah.
So to make this point is when you actually do those kinds of scientific inquiries and put it all together and compare and contrast, you can throw out memoirs. I don't mean you shouldn't have read it, and I don't mean that there is nothing about the Satanism that is important that you might want to know about if you don't know about that in history, and you don't know about how that works, and you haven't seen any of Ted Gunderson, and you haven't seen I Am a Phony on the Paul Death issue. But if you know those things, you do not need memoirs except to dislike Bill Moore. And, this is, and that's a very important thing. It's not to say I hate him.
No,
But I
he's
don't
just
like-
an absolute narcissist. I mean, that's the to me that's what the stem behind
is.
the whole thing
It is
that
narcissist.
it's just that it's pure narcissism. We're bumping up onto 4 hours here, so we better
Sure,
we
okay,
better
let me
call it
just
a
say,
night.
I do actually think Bill is a damaged boy. I think he's a mama's boy who was damaged. I think he's an alcoholic. I think he's a very damaged person. And having said that, I also think he's very involved in, let me put it nicely and without litigious problems and even a target on my back, things that David McGowan kind of hinted at. Okay,
Yeah.
I do believe that. But I don't believe that he is all bad. He is the sole focus. Unfortunately, though, like St. Jude, he's the body we're looking at to get to the shroud. And the irony is, when I was a kid, I had an interest in several things. I'll leave one of them out. But the Titanic, the pyramids, the question of the shroud, there are various sorts of questions I thought were fascinating. They actually all come in here. I never thought they would.
Yeah, that's
I thought, like, if anything, but they do. It's rather fascinating.
they do.
Well, not the Titanic, but you could say, the sinking ship. Yeah.
Oh, you never know. You never know. But
Yeah,
anyway,
you never
I'm gonna give it a whirl for everybody to, like, every week at the end of the show we give a big hearty wave and we say, okay, bye. Everybody hit the like
bye.
button and share. Thank you so much
Like,
for
share,
coming.
subscribe.
Claire's Twitter and her website are in the description along with some other things. So take a look at all that, folks. I'm gonna push the button now. Okay, bye.